In the world of Pick Me Up, victory has never been achieved, a game so cruel, no one has dared reach the final floor. But then, the impossible happened. The legendary Master Loki vanished, and when he opened his eyes, he was no longer a player, he was Islat Han, trapped inside the very game he once controlled, with an army of rookies, and only one chance. Here, every mission is life or death. Every mistake means losing someone forever. No resurrection, no second try. And before facing the horrors of the tower, they train, day after day, falling and getting back up, learning new skills, and leveling up side by side. Each battle strengthens their bodies and the bond between them. They're no longer just companions. They're a team that bleeds and grows together. To return home, he must conquer the 100th floor, and to do that, he'll need every drop of his cunning, his cold resolve, and his courage. Get ready for a battle where allies become family, enemies hide in the shadows, and the only certainty is that no one is safe. The game has begun, and it only ends with your death. Thus, the story begins with Mormont Carl, a former mercenary, who introduced himself and asked if anyone knew where they were. Soon after, Rael, a carpenter from Medora, introduced himself, confused about why they were there and unable to remember anything. Then Gina, who lived in the secluded forest, revealed her name and also questioned what was going on. Finally, Han Israt identified himself as a farmer, admitting he didn't know anything either. When one of them speculated they had been summoned by a mage, the carpenter rejected the idea, pointing out that the only certainty was that they all came from Tonner. Suddenly, a small winged figure appeared, questioning their conversation and warning them that the master would open a rift in the fabric of time. Next, the creature introduced herself as Isel, the fairy who managed the place, and warned them not to try anything, or they would get hurt. Then, the ex-mercenary asked if she was the one who brought them there, and the fairy replied that it didn't matter. With his weapon in hand, he retorted that she talked too much for someone so small. Right after, he advanced holding his weapon, saying he would teach her a lesson. However, he was struck by the fairy. His body fell lifeless, and a message indicated that he had returned to the goddess's embrace, with the cause of death listed as suicide due to stress. Isel stated that anyone who tried to touch her would die, and asked if they understood. With his death, the others screamed, and the fairy declared that what she wanted was for them to fight and defeat her. Then, a large rift in the space-time fabric opened. She pointed to the portal and ordered them to go through it if they didn't want to suffer the same fate. Then the farmer stepped forward, asking what they should do and demanding that the master give them weapons, since they had none. The forest girl asked what he was talking about, but the man added that with the death of the two-star hero, they should at least receive some hints. Reflecting on the situation, Isel agreed that he was right. She then asked the master what he thought about giving them equipment and quickly gave a tip on how to equip a weapon. Curious, the carpenter asked if the farmer knew something about the place, but he replied that he wasn't sure as he hadn't visited in a long time. The girl showed surprise at the response, which highlighted the real possibility of dying there. Quickly, he instructed them to grab a weapon, as things were about to begin. Thus, the group now carried simple weapons and began to move forward. Meanwhile, the carpenter noticed the disappearance of the body and asked if it was magic, but the fairy ordered the group to pass through the door immediately. Hesitant, he stood before the portal and wondered what it was, but Isel urged them to advance. At that moment, the girl asked several questions, and the farmer replied that all they needed to know was that they had to enter and defeat all enemies, but they were caught off guard. Thus, a message reported Jackson's death, and Han Israt explained that it was the fate of the weak, telling Jenna to be quiet when she asked what was happening. Next, another message announced the elimination of Group 1, and Isel was outraged by their defeat on the first floor. At that moment, she declared they were the only ones left, and Jenna asked why the previous ones hadn't returned yet, realizing it was now their turn. Soon after, an old man asked to leave, claiming weakness, but the girl refuted it, saying he was walking just fine. As everyone was passing through the portal, the fairy wished them all good luck. On the other side, the group appeared in a new place, resembling a temple, and wondered where they were. Then, a system message revealed that the challenge was the first floor of the main dungeon, indicating the objective was to climb the tower to save the world. At that moment, the farmer warned the group not to try anything foolish, as the door would open and the challenge would begin. Soon, they were enveloped by a light as they were transported. Next, they were in a different place, feeling even more confused. However, several level 3 goblins appeared, and he declared that they were on a battlefield. Without hesitation, he reminded them they would die if they didn't fight and ordered them to stay calm and eliminate the enemies. Looking back, he realized the other 3 thugs had run off, leaving them alone. However, the 3 old men were prevented from leaving by a barrier. Seeing that, the protagonist called them idiots. Calling out to the boy, Jenna asked if defeating all the goblins would allow them to leave. However, before they could continue the conversation, the group of monsters charged at them. Even though he had never handled a weapon or shield before, the young man prepared for battle. Finally, he revealed his real name as Han Seojin, noting that he was lucky to end up in that place. Meanwhile, the game Pick Me Up, developed by Mobius, appears on the screen connecting to the server. In it, the player must attack a 100-story tower, collecting materials to build a solid base and advancing with tactics. Additionally, the game stands out for its strict rules, where a hero's death is permanent, highlighting the seriousness of the dungeons. Amid a bloody scene, a shadowy level 999 figure appears, raising questions about whether it's a possible bug. Soon after, the screen displays a defeat message, and the character claims that it's a system bug. Even though he couldn't see clearly, the guy realized he had been instantly annihilated. The red-eyed, sharp-toothed creature then reveals it has found him. Immediately after, he reacts by questioning if that was some kind of attack pattern. Suddenly, he appears wielding a sword in a burning village. The system prompts him to defeat a goblin to complete the tutorial, but he doesn't understand what the message means. Unable to grasp anything, he wonders if the situation isn't way too realistic. However, the goblin attacks him, snapping him back to reality. With little choice, he knows the feeling of battle, and killing a living creature is something he can't keep up with. Soon after, he finds himself in a new green setting, while a message announces the stage's completion. He recognizes the familiar scene and immediately associates it with the game Pick Me Up. With that, he yells out, questioning what is going on. After that, he walks toward a bright light. A super rare announcement reveals the acquisition of the hero Shay, a 4-star warrior. The warrior, Shay Radasteri, asks who summoned her while her stats are displayed. He tries to introduce himself as Han Seo-jin, but she struggles to pronounce it. Next, a text explains that Master Enkina put them back in a dungeon and used Shay in battle, while she criticizes his rookie behavior. The dungeon is then successfully cleared, Shay levels up and becomes MVP, highlighting the vast difference in skill between them. However, the real problem begins now, as the last part of the tutorial awaits and the option to strengthen a hero through synthesis is available. Soon, Isol asks why he isn't proceeding, urging him on. He recognizes Isol, but she's surprised and asks how he knows her name and who he is. The young man reveals that he was a player and introduces himself as Han Seo-jin, but she reacts surprised at how little he resembles Han Israt, the person she knows from the game. Irritated, the fairy asks why he looks different from the image, while he identifies himself as Han Seo-jin from Seoul, asking to be sent back. Curious, Isol asks if he's from Earth, and he confirms, asking back if she's from Mars. Startled, Isol screams upon realizing the truth, while he questions the absurdity of the situation. Even so, she tells him to get inside already, but he refuses, fearing what might happen. While she reassures him that he won't die, he'll just be synthesized. Meanwhile, inside the room, Shay was already waiting for him, though annoyed by the noise. Looking at his hands, he realized something had started. Synthesis is the strengthening by combining two heroes, where one is sacrificed to boost the other's stats. However, the problem is that he's a 1-star and Shay is a 4-star knight, and a regular player would have no reason to save him by accepting death. The synthesis is completed, and the boy reacts in shock, enveloped in an aura of energy. The 4-star warrior begins to vanish into the light, and he asks why, saying it doesn't make sense since she's the superior one. Calmly, Shay explains that she wasn't the chosen one and because of that, is disappearing. Still smiling, she says she'll leave the rest to him. The boy watches everything with a slightly disturbed expression. Soon after, he returns to reality, telling everyone not to let their guard down, or they would definitely die. While defending himself, he managed to survive. Synthesis is based on the union of heroes, where one is absorbed to empower the other. He considers himself lucky, as Shay died due to a mistake by the master, but he's angry about it and wonders about the remaining two. Despite his request to check later, Jinna decides to see how they're doing. However, distracted, a goblin strikes him from behind. Without knowing how he ended up inside the game, he realizes that he, Han Seo-jin, was summoned as the 1-star hero Han Israt. Before being brought to this world, he remembers that the glitched level 999 monster was smiling. With that, he understands that bastard dragged him here. After killing the goblin, he says the monster messed with the wrong person. Soon, he and Gina are standing on a battlefield full of corpses. The girl looks at her companion and mentions his arm, to which he replies that it'll be fine once they return. In the game, the player has little control over battles, since most combat is automated and handled by the heroes, but the global success explains a lot. That success comes from the ability to watch everything like a god, and the young man sees a giant eye in the sky. Smiling, he asks if they find this fun. He explains that he was also a player who enjoyed Pick Me Up, full of item crafting, strategy, tactics, and hidden secrets. Now Han Israt, the master of masters and 5th in the global ranking Loki, challenges everyone to see how he'll survive to the end. Eventually, he accepted the situation, deciding it was time to act maturely and not like a baby. Now the young man is training inside Pick Me Up, after being reborn and summoned as a 1-star hero. During this moment, he observes the two ways a hero can die. Realizing that at this level he was considered useless in the game, he quickly notices that his attributes and low growth rate put him at risk of being fused, which is visible on his status screen. So he decides he must get stronger to survive, get revenge, and return, since otherwise, everything would be impossible. As he keeps running, he thinks he must adapt quickly to avoid dying or being devoured, which reminds him of military service. Later, he starts doing sit-ups, realizing that being physically strong isn't enough. He needs to change mentally and avoid panic to survive. He then scolds himself, remembering his past courage when he survived alone, even without help from his parents. Soon Jin appears beside him and asks what he's doing. He explains to his companion that he was training to kill monsters, and she scolds him for being rude and making her search for him. Holding a bow, the girl reveals she spent the whole night thinking about what to do and that they couldn't leave. While aiming her weapon at a target, she explains that her father was a hunter and that she practiced archery, assuring she wouldn't be dead weight. With determination, she declares that nothing would change if she just kept crying. The young man asks if it was her first combat experience, also questioning her skill with the weapon, and she says it's average. As she aims her weapon, he notices she raised her stats, and even with a low growth rate, managed to defeat a goblin on her first try. So he decides to help her, recognizing her determination and clear goal. The girl extends her hand, remembering her father's advice about choosing the right person to survive with. They seal their agreement with a handshake. Right after, he calls out loudly for Isel. The fairy appears irritated, complaining that she's busy, while he comments on how fast she was. Then she refuses to answer his questions and instructs him to climb the tower to find the answers. However, he reveals he can see the fairy's level, which is 257, even as she denies it. He confirms that he's the only one who can see messages from the game and the master. Curious, he asks what would happen if the master leaves the game, and she replies she prays that never happens. He then reflects on a past incident where the master tried to fuse him with a higher level hero, realizing that the game is linked to a phone and cannot be restarted. Then he asks Isel if time flows differently there, but she refuses to answer more questions. Even so, he thanks her for the information about time, which irritates her and makes her curse at him. He soon realizes that the fairy can't touch him and can only intervene for self-defense or if a hero disobeys the master. Curious, Jenna asks what they were talking about, and he explains they'll have to attack a 100-floor tower. Next, he tells the girl that an entity called Master gives orders through the fairy, and that they must follow missions all the way to the top floor to be set free. They both observe the situation, recognizing that their lives depend on the Master's decisions. After a whole day of training, the young man discovered a fun new rule in that world. Essential items and food were replenished daily, and if he thought about what he wanted, it would appear in a drawer or wardrobe the next day, but not weapons. In addition, there were different rules for training results, which made sense considering heroes of the same rank had varying abilities. He reflects that training doesn't increase attributes or level but grants and refines skills, and now he realizes they weren't just artificial intelligence. A skilled master categorized heroes into 3 types, ignoring those who connect easily. He also realizes that high-rank heroes are summoned with abilities, while low-rank ones had hidden talents to be discovered by the master. Lastly, the 3rd category was physical condition, which he was working on now. As they walked, he explained to his companion that the master was summoning a new hero and that, since the group needed 5 people, 3 more summons were necessary. Soon, 3 new individuals appeared, and one of them asked where they were. With determination, Gina instructed the newcomers to prepare for battle, promising to explain everything once they were safe, which caused some questions. Then, with a command, Isel opened a space-time rift. He asked his ally to grab a weapon quickly, and she agreed, while the newcomers only watched. Soon, Isel scolded the rookies, asking them to pay attention to what she was saying. Next, the portal closed, and the fairy smiled, wishing them a good time. The group of 5 characters appeared on the 2nd floor, and the mission was to subdue and defeat all enemies. As soon as they arrived, the newbies questioned the place, while he asked if Jenna was ready, and she confirmed. Then, goblins and wolves of various levels appeared in the area. Since it was the first time the 3 had entered the portal, they were scared. Gina's attributes were reduced by 30% due to fear, and he asked if she had a similar reaction to theirs. With that, he asked if she had eaten something spoiled while trying to scare her. She asked not to be provoked like that, and he instructed her to deal with the 2 goblins while he handled the wolves. He noticed that the girl's state had shifted, unlike the rookies who showed little usefulness. Next, the wolves charged toward him, and the young man prepared for combat. He quickly struck one of the wolves with his sword in an attack. Even after the blow, the monster remained alive, making him question the weapon's effectiveness. Finally, with a strong strike, he managed to defeat one of the wolves. Then a wolf bit the boy's shield. However, he struck the creature with a blow that finished it off. Afterward, he looked at the defeated wolves and asked about the goblins. With her weapon in hand, the archer was praised for using them as targets and was asked how many arrows she had used. He then told her to stop, warning that the enemy was already dead, and she obeyed. After that, the group was enveloped in a blue light that transported them to the next floor. They were then congratulated for completing the second level, and the next door opened. Next, they were taken to the third floor, and he noticed it used the same transport system as before. So he asked himself if they were heading straight to the third level. Meanwhile, the guide yawned, saying she was exhausted, which earned her a scolding for not having done anything. Thus, he reflected that if time there was 3 times slower than in the waiting room, the others would only need to log in again in 3 days. He then checked his own stats and noticed that his intelligence had dropped, but his strength had increased, indicating physical improvement. He thought that 1-star heroes were just normal people who had never been on a battlefield. After all, how could they be expected to fight monsters if they'd never even held a weapon? On the other hand, one of the rookies, Mormont, was a 2-star mercenary, which indicated that combat-related professions had more stars. Moreover, he reflected that these mercenaries didn't panic easily, and that those with 3 or more stars already knew why they had to fight. As a result, he deduced that the archer had that understanding, and she complained about not being able to talk with the other rookies. In response, he asked why he should care about people he saw as useless, and she suggested they persuade them to become allies, as it was better than nothing. With a suspicious look, he stared at the rookies and said they'd disappear soon anyway. Along those lines, he told her to forget about them and announced they would fight together in the next battle. But one of them tried to speak, only to be quickly dismissed by him, who said he wasn't interested. However, the rookie reacted angrily. Soon after, he was hit by a punch. Without delay, he scolded him, saying he was joking while the others were sacrificing themselves. With a slight smile, the archer watched the boy, who asked if she was happy with what he did. The next day, training continued, with several targets spread across the field. Once they finished the basic exercises, both practiced with weapons, swinging a wooden one and firing arrows. Meanwhile, the others did not show up at the training field, choosing instead to search for an exit that didn't exist. In the end, he trained by dodging arrows flying toward him, trying to destroy them. Then, Han Israt was hit in the leg by an arrow. Jinna quickly asked if he was okay, and the young man replied that she didn't need to worry. He also informed her that the laws of the place were different, as wounds healed very quickly. Despite the pain, he continued training, seeing it as proof that he was still alive. Meanwhile, Aizel shouted for everyone to head to the square when the master arrived, asking if they wanted to die. Gina, in turn, commented on how tiring the training was, and the swordsman asked why she was adapting so quickly, hearing that she was already used to hardships. However, the newcomers protested to the leader, demanding to be sent back, tired of eating potatoes and being forced to fight. Annoyed, the girl attacked all the rookies, promising that they would pay for it. Right after, she ordered them to approach, and everyone obeyed in silence. Suddenly, goblins appeared on the 3rd floor, where the mission was to subdue and eliminate all enemies. Even noticing the improvement in the enemy's equipment, the young man stated it wouldn't be a problem and that they would fight just like they trained. Without hesitation, he charged and defeated one of the goblins with a single sword strike. Jenna then commented that she was getting the hang of battle, while her partner said the fight was boring. After that, he noticed that the others didn't plan to fight, which would prevent them from gaining experience. Next, the two of them watched the master activate the Wheel of Fortune, which gave the option to challenge the 1st floor again. As a result, the group was sent to the safe zone of the 1st floor, and Gina realized that the master wasn't entirely heartless. Once again, enemies identical to those from the 1st floor appeared. Then Gina was announced as the MVP of the completed stage, receiving 1,000 gold as a reward. Meanwhile, he looked at the option to challenge the 1st floor again, understanding that the master wouldn't let them rest easily. Despite this, Gina expressed her exhaustion, wondering if the master would send them again, and he replied, "Who knows?" Even reluctantly, she complained about having to take care of the rookies, but the young man reassured her, saying it would all end that day. Curious, Gina asked what he meant by end, and the swordsman explained that he didn't believe the master was kind to useless people like the rookies. Suddenly, the screen displayed that the master was initiating synthesis, while the structure in the background seemed to activate. In response, the rookies questioned the new location, while a message on the screen instructed them to select a flock for sacrifice and synthesis. Finally, the warrior watched the process, his eyes glowing, and bid farewell to those who didn't take the opportunity. However, Han Israt stated that they had a chance, or rather several opportunities. He then watched a device screen, aware that the master knew who the best and worst participants in the battles were. Soon after, Isel ordered Gina and Yelsens to quickly go to the synthesizer, while the man reassured the girl that nothing would happen to her. However, the other man asked what would happen if he went instead, and Han Israt replied that he would likely be judged for his actions. Still, the man argued that he hadn't done anything and had been kidnapped for no reason, but the reply came swiftly, while Isel noted the rare agreement between them. Next, Han Israt asked if the man wanted his help, but explained that it would be different if he at least pretended to fight. In the end, Isel told him to just go already. Shortly after, a system message asked if they wanted to synthesize him, while the man cried that it wasn't fair and begged to be spared. As a blue energy manifested around him, he started screaming. Soon, a synthesis complete notification appeared, indicating that Gina leveled up and acquired the skill Hawk Eyes, and she described how the man turned into light and vanished. At that moment, Han Israt explained to the girl that in that room, the useless became sacrifices, and stated that now it was his turn. Then Isel pointed and declared that Han and Toby would be next. In turn, another man named Toby shouted that he was going home, repeating that he would return to his home. Because of that, Han Israt walked calmly after the message announced that he had leveled up and acquired the skill Composure, under the terrified gaze of the other man. Still confused, the man was frightened, and Han Israt said that he had been lucky. Meanwhile, Gina said she would disappear if the master considered her useless, and was asked why she was sad, since she didn't want to be left behind. Soon after, she asked if the same fate would await her if she ever became useless. Finally, Han Israt explained that on the higher floors, monsters and players become stronger, and they would either die to enemies or as sacrifices, while Gina noted how much he seemed to know. Therefore, he instructed her that, to survive, she had to follow her father's teachings. On the second day, Gina bowed to him, asking him to take care of her, and the man asked what had happened. Right after, the girl declared that she would approach whoever was strong, citing his own instruction, and asked him to take care of her. In the end, Han Israt expressed surprise and assured her that she wouldn't die if she stayed diligent, advising her not to worry. Because of that, Eren apologized for being foolish and causing trouble, admitting his cowardice for letting them fight alone, but promised to be different from now on. Then, Han Israt asked how he could trust him, and the boy offered to kneel if necessary, while Gina realized the message had finally gotten through. With that, Han Israt handed him a weapon, explaining that it was the easiest to use, and asked if he understood the basics of combat with it. Soon, the man questioned the other's actions and told him to get ready to fight while holding his own weapon. Surprised, Eren asked if Han Israt would teach him how to fight. However, the more experienced one revealed that he had never used a spear and had learned to fight by himself, telling him to learn on his own. While attacking, Han Israt told him to be grateful for having someone to fight with, since he only had dummies to practice with. Eren, eyes shut, shouted while attacking. Soon after, Han Israt asked if he was closing his eyes during battle and kicked him. As Eren bent over, he was warned that if he were facing a monster, he would already be dead. At that moment, Gina asked Han Israt why he was being so harsh, and he answered that he didn't want to worry about anyone and would leave behind those who couldn't keep up. After that, Han Israt asked the other about his family, and Eren replied that his sister was waiting for him, to which the man commented that he had family, and he only had willpower. Then he asked the boy what the consequences would be if he didn't return home. Soon, Han Israt stated that dying to a monster is more painful than being synthesized, and told him to give up if he couldn't move forward. Then he showed a smile while his eyes shone brightly. With that, he acknowledged that his companion's eyes were much better than before. Soon, a system notification appeared on screen, announcing the selection of the forge, an attachment to Arsenal Level 1, and the cost of 500 gems to build it. Afterward, Han Israt observed that it was now possible to roam freely, and the forge had also been unlocked. He called Isel, who questioned his authority to summon her, while he complained that he was bored in the repository and asked for a change. Suddenly, Isel attacked Han Israt, who asked if she wasn't giving advice, and if she couldn't access the internet or interfere with the system. Isel confirmed that she could, explaining that her hobby was browsing the internet and that the tips she sent were a foundation for summoning equipment, unlocking training, and then the forge. When asked how he knew that, Han Israt revealed it was from a popular post on the Pick Me Up site by Loki, claiming he had been a user. Isel insinuated that he must have been a beginner with no progress and praised Loki as the master of masters and a god of Pick Me Up, capable of being the greatest hero. Soon, Han Israt asked why she liked Loki, and Isel answered that he made the impossible possible, asking if he didn't know that even as a user. In the end, the man apologized for ruining the fun, and Isel flew away. Right after, with his eyes glowing blue, Han Israt revealed himself to be Loki. Then Isel questioned Han Israt's statement and what kind of bluff that was, and he revealed the account number. Soon, Han Israt explained that the Pick Me Up account number was secret, known only to the master and the staff, and offered his Google account as proof. However, Isel became irritated, expressing disbelief upon learning that he was Loki, and said the situation didn't make sense. Then, Han Israt asked about Ragna Loki, and she explained it was Loki's fan club, requiring a subscription to be a VIP member. Next, he questioned the existence of the fan club, and the woman asked if he had said weird things to Loki. However, Isel interrupted Han Israt, asking what would happen to Niflheim without him, and he answered that he had no idea. Niflheim was the waiting room of the account, with 13 floors, a capacity for 20,000 people, and optimized facilities for specific levels. Soon, Isel asked what would become of the 20,000 troops, prompting Han Israt to suggest she send him back. However, he said he couldn't be sent back, as he already knew Isel was just a mid-level manager in charge of strange tasks. Then Han Israt asked if the owner of the waiting room was human, and if the summoned heroes weren't actually artificial intelligences, confirming that everyone in that world was a real person. It was revealed that the master didn't know the heroes were human, being just a user who played pick-me-up and subjected them to crisis for entertainment. Right after, Han Israt asked if climbing the tower to the 100th floor would send him back to Earth, and Isel replied that she didn't know, surprising him. That made Han Israt ask who brought him to that place, but she couldn't answer, and his eyes glowed blue. Feeling regret, Isel apologized to Han Israt, who replied it was okay, and that he would find out the truth by climbing the tower. Next, he asked about the extent of Isel's authority, and she explained that she could give advice, manage facilities, and assist in astronomical activities. Soon after, Han Israt asked if the master's waiting rooms were all the same, and she confirmed they were, with only minor differences. After that, he observed the dimensional bubbles and asked if there were 100 million worlds like those. With that, he understood that the system used real people instead of AIs, and that the infinite content might come from individual worlds. Then, Han Israt declared that to climb the tower, all they had to do was listen to him, because he would make it possible. Meanwhile, he observed Gina and concluded that she was a genius for learning to use weapons so quickly despite never using them before. On the other hand, he noticed that Aaron's case was more complicated, as at this rate the boy might die. Soon, Gina approached saying she went easy on Aaron and asked if Han Israt wasn't going to train his #1 subordinate. At that moment, Isel appeared to confront Gina, declaring that she was the true subordinate and starting an argument. To end the fight, Han Israt held Isel in his hand and reminded her she had work to do. While being held, the tiny creature declared herself his #1 subordinate to Gina, but he ignored her. Then Han Israt asked Isel to use her authority to open the village warehouse. Soon after, she was instructed to open the forge, as Han explained to Gina that she couldn't continue using her rusty weapon. Standing before the place, he reflected that after speaking with the fairy he realized he was half master and half hero. With the forge now lit, he concluded that if that were true, he could carry out a territorial invasion like a master. Then Isel asked what he planned to do, but Han Israt simply questioned the feasibility of creating something in that place. After a system warning about the extremely low chance of success, he stated the production would be manual. Even with Isel pointing out the triple penalty, Han Israt chose the ultra hell difficulty and told her to just watch. He then said there was no problem, and the crafting process began. Soon, Isel recognized the legendary Thousand Hands technique upon seeing his hands move at incredible speed. With that, the system announced a super success, and revealed that a new rank C sword had been forged. Thus, Han managed to craft several rank C weapons with super success. Soon after, Isel asked him if he would make more, and the young man explained that he didn't want the master to get the wrong idea from producing too much. On the 4th floor, with the mission to defeat all enemies, Gina praised the flexibility and security of high-quality items, and the blacksmith stated that personal items couldn't be stolen. Facing harpies and goblins, he considered it reckless to attack with just 3 people, assigned Gina to deal with the harpy, and asked Aaron to protect her. Next, the monsters charged and combat began. Suddenly, Aaron swung his spear while screaming. With the warrior frightened and his stats lowered, Han grabbed a goblin and called it a hyper little brat. Right after, Gina punched Aaron in the face, telling him to snap out of it. With a bleeding nose, the boy looked at his own hand while she asked if he'd be okay with dying if he failed again. During the intense battle, the 3 fought against the monsters until the stage was completed. After the fight, Aaron was added to the favorites list, and Han commented that the master must have liked him, making the warrior react with surprise. Super excited, he shouted that he had survived. Jin remarked that the #2 subordinate had improved, following after #1. In response, Han revealed that the #1 subordinate was Cirrus of Niflheim, while holding his sword. According to him, the first group has 5 members, all 6 stars and level 99, with divine weapons and powerful abilities that he himself built, and that they might encounter them. Reflecting, Han thinks that Surus, being the sub-master of an idle game, will do everything properly. With Yurnet as a precaution, he considers them smart. Then, Yurnet asks if Surus really intends to go, and she replies that they need to use every second they have. Finally, Yurnet offers to take care of the investigation, saying she doesn't have much to offer, and Surus also asks her to look after the others in her place. With that, the mission to find the master was entrusted to Yurnet. As a result, the city center was upgraded, advancing to level 2, and the surrounding environment changed. At that moment, Han Ezrat explained that the game doesn't hand out gems easily, and that those who spend are the pay-to-win players. He then noticed the master's new summon, who wondered who it would be this time. A bright light appeared in front of them, and the young man announced that it was time to welcome the new guest. Several newly summoned people looked around in confusion, questioning where they were and what was happening. One of the newcomers asked Han who they were, but he silenced him, declaring that he would only explain to those who survived on their own. Soon, Isel asked if there were any blacksmiths, animators, or cooks, while the new arrivals, not understanding, asked what she was talking about. Then Jin asked Han what Isel was doing, and he explained that she was assigning jobs because there were many new constructions. Finally, he stated that if the ones who die had been summoned now, they could have become non-combatants, and he soon announced that the waiting hall system would change. A message announces the formation of groups and hero selection, while Han Ezrat explains that the unskilled don't deserve even scraps. With that, the master begins categorizing useful heroes, testing them in a dungeon, and Isel tells them to enter the gate under penalty of death if they fail to adapt. After the message indicates John's death, Jinna questions Han Ezrat about the lack of explanation, but he refuses to detail the fate of the dead. Soon, another message reports Teddy's death, and the strategist acknowledges the second casualty, saying at least 2 should survive. Next, Eren declares that he will fight too, but Isel stops him, saying it's not his turn. With that, Jinna questions her companion's behavior, and Han Ezrat suggests Isel recommend him for the group, to which she agrees due to his need for combat experience. As soon as a system notification asks if Eren can join the group, the leader stares at him, and a message informs that heroes who wish to fight may demonstrate greater skills. Soon after, Han Ezrat allows Eren to help them but warns him not to set a precedent like he did, and the young man responds that he understands. As Gina loudly complains that she wants to go back and eat rice after only having potatoes, the strategist reflects on her perception of the situation. With the stage completed and no one injured, Eren confirms he only killed 1 goblin when asked. Soon, Han Ezrat announces their return to the residence, and Gina asks if they will finally be free from eating only potatoes. She notices the facility upgrade and asks if the cafeteria will now let them eat expensive food, as long as the master doesn't deem them useless. Gina celebrates the possibility of eating high-quality steaks, but he reminds them of those who were discarded before. Then, an older man complains about the lack of ingredients beyond potatoes, even though there are spices. Observing the man, Han Ezrat sees his rookie tag and that he has no skills, despite calling himself a master. The evaluator, sitting down, asks if there's anyone with cooking skill, since the current cook has none. So he asks a woman if her name is Chloe, and after she confirms, he informs her she'll be the new cook. Then, a system panel appears asking if he wishes to choose Chloe as chef, resulting in Dolph losing his position. Dolph tries to ask for a second chance, but Han Ezrat criticizes his lie, saying he should have come up with something more convincing. He declares he will allow that kind of behavior only once. Next, Gina, beside Chloe, praises the flavor of the potatoes, surprised by the variety of tastes, and the new cook explains she used lots of spices. With that, Han Ezrat says they can repeat this lesson for the next group of rookies if they don't want to see people dying around them. As Gina speaks the truth, saying they didn't fight before arriving here, she then suggests they all work together. Thus, Han Ezrat informs Enoch and Chloe that they will be carpenters and chefs, respectively, and that they can help in other ways. Then Dolph volunteered to gather wood, but Han Ezrat threatened to make him the first sacrifice for synthesis if he was lying again. Gathered at the table, the strategist explained that although non-combatants had a higher survival rate, the most skilled would be transferred to the combat group. The next day, Han Ezrat's life began to change a bit, and he wondered if there would be only 3 new members. Soon, 3 youths, Zid, Ursher, and Deka, joined the training, and the leader reflected that fighting Eren had already become boring, so this would be a good change. During combat with the new recruits, he realized that Eren was a bad influence, as they also called him boss, and that the stat difference was too great for them to react. Next, Jenna was shown training proficiently with the bow at level 5, and her skill with short swords had reached level 2. Soon after, Eren, the first to arrive and the last to leave training, was seen wielding his weapon, but his spear skills had only reached level 2. The three young men, who developed fencing at level 1 and got along well due to their similar ages, praised Han Israt's strength, and he explained it was due to his level. A few days later, during another summoning, the strategist observed a new group of people and noted that he didn't need to intervene, as Eren and the other three handled everything. After the test, only one person died, Gina, and he observed the population slowly growing and continuing to increase. However, she asked why the master wasn't moving on to the 5th floor, since they had cleared the 4th some time ago. Han Israt then explained that the 5th floor was much harder and that the remaining members of Group 1 hadn't yet been decided. He also continued explaining that every 5 floors the difficulty spikes, like a boss floor, and there was a chance even he might not survive. In the end, the strategist chose not to tell Jenna how many would die, while thinking about the future intensity of the challenges. The mission on the 4th floor was revealed: eliminate enemies, with various flying and ground monsters appearing. Faced with this, the group took their positions for battle, shields in front, with Gina and another fighter with a bow and weapon ready to provide support. As one of the warriors was struck by a monster's claw, he stated that the weak have their own ways of fighting. In formation, 2 members used their weapons to battle the surrounding ground monsters. Soon, one of them delivered a powerful blow to an enemy, while Han Israt instructed them to rely on the group's strength instead of individual effort. Even though he could intervene, he chose not to so the others could practice formation tactics, as he could have completed it alone. After the battle, the strategist considered that the missions on the 5th floor might present challenges he wouldn't be able to handle on his own. The equipment workshop was activated after the master obtained a blacksmith and a tanner, showing progress on his account. Inside the workshop, blacksmiths, tanners, and carpenters collaborated to produce rank-y items, such as shields and weapons, increasing the survival chances of newer summoned individuals. On the other hand, those who underperformed during training or tried to escape, like Dolph, who lied about his class, were sent to the synthesizer. Later, one of the warriors held a shield and asked if they would go to the 4th floor again, expressing his desire to try the next one soon. At that moment, Han asked Aizel if they would head to the 5th floor today, while Gina seemed surprised by the idea and the other confirmed it. As the group advanced, one of them warned that the mission would be a bit different, and that focus was vital to avoid danger. Soon after, Eren noted the absence of monsters in the area, and Han instructed the group to stay in formation and go straight to the center of the city to check the situation. Upon observing the deserted city, he noticed the lack of monsters and civilians and concluded that this was not a subjugation mission. Suddenly, one of the members screamed and pointed, calling the boss, as the strategist watched closely. A skeleton was seen leaning against a wooden structure. Eren and Jinna questioned the absence of people and the dry blood stains, and he explained that the previous missions were merely tutorials. Then Han asked Jinna to climb a tower, and she accepted the task. From atop the structure, she reported what she saw after the commander asked. Jenna then warned that goblins were approaching from outside the city, and he asked how many. Thousands of goblins were advancing in a mass, and the mission on the 5th floor was to survive the massive enemy assault. Faced with this, Eren questioned her count, and Han ordered her to come down from the tower. Then the young man asks if there is a problem, and the strategist clarifies that the mission is a survival challenge, requiring them to hold off the enemies for a while. One of the warriors asks about hiding, and Han is blocked by a barrier when trying to enter a house, so he decides they should keep moving. He then reveals that the required survival time is only 10 minutes after the enemies enter. Despite the circumstances, Han considers the task doable even with unfavorable luck. With a 30-minute window and only a 9% chance of survival, Gina and the others run, while he mentions the need to avoid standing still. Faced with uncertainty, one warrior asks about a better location, and the leader explains that all the houses are damaged and have openings, and there is no time to look for another spot. Thus, Han decides the group will stay at that point, positioning them strategically in the open space. Soon he explains that due to the narrow passage, they'll face enemies one by one, and the warriors say they'll do their best. With that, the strategist assigns combat positions, placing himself on the left, Eren on the right, Zid and Ursher in the back, instructing them to fight in turns and rotate to recover. Then he directs Jinna to the center of the area, asking her to save her arrows and shoot only under his command, and she agrees. While building a barricade, he shouts for the others to do the same before the goblins arrive, warning of the danger. At that moment, Han checks the timer and realizes that the stage time is the same as Earth's, and that the countdown will only start when they come into contact with the goblins. As soon as the timer begins counting down, he sees the barricades aren't ready and prepares to block an attack. Urgently, he instructs the group to use enemy corpses to build barricades and receives Eren's confirmation. Gina asks to be notified if he gets tired, while Han moves skillfully with his shield in battle. He blocks and counterattacks in a circular pattern, noting that the enemies follow repetitive and predictable behavior. Meanwhile, Eren, visibly overwhelmed, asks if the survival really is only 10 minutes. In response, Han admits he lied earlier, while continuing to fight the enemies. Soon, hundreds of goblins approach en masse as the timer reads 26:48, and as a final plea, he asks that they don't have a shitty death in that place. Immediately, Han shouts for Zid to switch places with Ursher. Even insisting he can keep going, the boy is ordered to switch immediately. Meanwhile, Han realizes that he's still low on energy. He observes that the team members aren't just low level but also tire quickly from excessive movement. Despite that, he continues fighting efficiently, using minimal energy to stab and slash the enemies, and states that they are just weak first-floor mobs. Faced with the swarm of goblins, he questions their persistence as they continue advancing. With that, Han orders another position switch. Soon he calls for Ursher, who responds, and warns that this is the most dangerous part. He then directs Jenna to assist Zid, telling her to retrieve her arrows as soon as she fires them. Gina, who had been waiting, activates her skill and is instructed to deal with the goblins coming from the opening. One of her arrows strikes a monster in the head, and she confirms the orders. At that moment, Eren questions the 10-minute survival time again. Han shouts, revealing that only 5 minutes have passed. Amid the combat, Jaina stomps firmly and demands the enemies stop coming, saying she finds them annoying. Zid is injured and bleeding, and a message indicates that his life will slowly decline. Han shouts again for him to switch places with Ursher, telling him to hang in there and hold the goblins back without thinking. Soon after, he scolds him, telling him to stop being stubborn and that he'll be healed once he returns. With tears on his face, Zid has his stats reduced by 30% when he mentions his hand. Scolded for his performance, the boy apologizes. Han tells Jenna to stop the bleeding and reminds her that Ursher will die if there is no switch, and she confirms the command. At that moment, Ursher shouts that his weapon isn't working. Han asks Zid if he can switch, and he says yes, and that he can still fight. Then the switch is ordered. Next, Han tells Ursher to check his weapon, and the boy reacts visibly shaken. He concludes that an iron weapon of rank F, even if dull, can still be used to strike goblins. With that, he instructs them that if the weapon doesn't work, use a shield, while he himself uses his own shield to strike an enemy. When Han tells Jenna to switch places with Eren, the boy says he can still fight. However, he is instructed by Jenna to rest when he can and not to be stubborn while she continues fighting. Han shouts that there are only 3 minutes left, wondering how 30 can feel so long. Soon after, he tells Eren to switch places with Gina, and she asks if it's already time, while the other says 10 seconds of rest is enough. Then, Han orders Gina to shoot arrows at Ursher, and she questions the command. Firmly, he yells that they'll all die if that side is breached, ordering her to shoot everything. Before he could ask to switch places, a goblin hits him in the stomach. Then Zid is seen on the ground as a message indicates he's fallen into a morbid state and his life is in danger. At that moment, Gina asks what to do while looking at the knife stuck in him, complaining about the pain. Soon after, Ursher begs him to hold on for a few more seconds. Then, Han Israt orders Ursher to go left, assuring him that he'll take care of their fallen comrade and telling him to move. As a message announces Zid's death, Ursher screams in response. Next, Han Israt informs Jinna that their ally has died and instructs her to ignore the body and help in another area, to which she agrees. With a warning about the awakening of new skills, Jinna asks how much time is left. Han Israt shouts not to worry about that and to keep fighting. As their skills awaken, he defends with his shield and exclaims that improvements mean nothing if everyone dies. Soon, Ursher screams, and a message indicates he is bleeding and will continuously lose health. Surrounded by shadow creatures, the young man begs the chief for help, saying he doesn't want to die. Faced with this, Han Israt calls Gina and Eren to follow him, saying they'll mourn Zid and Ursher only after escaping alive. Gina asks if everyone is going to die, and he orders her to stop talking. Next, he instructs her to climb the wall behind them, and she asks if he's sending her to flee alone, then gets irritated and asks where she's supposed to pull them up. With the creatures closing in, Han Israt warns them of their presence, saying they can't afford to use one attack per creature. Jenna shouts from atop a structure for them to climb quickly. Then he tells Eren to climb and extends his hand to Gina. Soon after, one of the creatures strikes the companion's leg. Meanwhile, Han Israt tells Jenna to hold him and strike the creature with her sword. With weapon in hand, he is forced to cut Eren's leg. Eren screams as he bleeds, with an alert showing he'll lose health continuously. Han Israt tells her to pull him up, as his condition is critical and his life is at risk. At the same time, he realizes the creatures are climbing, stacking on top of each other. Then he instructs Jenna to use Eren's weapon to attack everything that approaches. He orders them to stop the creatures from climbing, as there will be nowhere else to run. Jenna drops the weapon and asks what to do, and he tells her to kick the creatures. The archer then asks how much time is left, due to the overwhelming number of enemies, saying they can't hold out much longer. Han Israt shouts for them to hang on 30 more seconds, saying time feels so slow, and begs them to trust him. Finally, he urges them to stay alive just a little longer, as a timer shows 32 seconds. But at that moment, Han Israt is struck by an attack that pierces through him. At that moment, Han Israt thinks it's over and that he's going to die there, finding it unfair for it to happen on just the 5th floor. With red eyes, he asks why he was the one chosen. Transformed, he exclaims that it's not over and they're only on the 5th floor. He then furiously attacks the creatures, refusing to die in that place. With glowing eyes and surrounded by a red aura, he challenges the creatures as a message announces he acquired the skill Berserk. He asks if the enemies want to kill him, daring them to come and saying he won't fall, even if he breaks. With a single strike, he destroys several creatures at once. Next, his weapon shatters in pieces in his hand. Even so, he declares that he will never stop, even with his gear destroyed, as the creatures continue to close in on him. The timer reaches 0, and he remains standing, surrounded by enemies. Then, a blue light surrounds the group as a message congratulates the master for clearing the 5th floor, unlocking daily missions. Jaina asks for help, saying she has no strength left to stand. Holding her hand, she asks if they survived. He confirms that they did, while she asks if reaching the 5th floor means it will always be this hard, but the leader explains that this was an exception. He also explains that if anyone had failed their role, everyone would have died, and reflects that the difficulty would have been lower if he had trained Zid and Ursher a bit more. He then adds that survival would be less difficult with a more prepared group, and that they were unlucky to be weak when everything happened, which Gina seems to understand. Soon, Dekka runs toward the group and congratulates the leader. He then informs them that Klo has prepared a meal and asks about Zid and Ursher, to which Han Islet replies that they're dead. When he hears the confirmation again, his expression changes quickly. As the group returns, Isel announces that the master is calling those who were summoned. Although lying down, Han Islet reflects that death will be common when climbing the tower and he won't get sentimental, wondering how he acquired the Berserk skill. He notes that his composure allows him to stay sane, while Berserk trades that sanity for power, and he believes this duality ties into being both a master and a hero. Still, he continues thinking that he doesn't know what to do and prefers not to think about it today, since he knows things will get busy starting tomorrow. While Gina is training, the young man says she always arrives after him and asks what's going on, to which she responds that she doesn't want to die. Gina gains skills in yesterday's battle, showing talent and effort, unlike Eren, who didn't acquire any despite the challenges. He reflects that her growth stat is limited to 5, a value expected from a 3-star. In an upside-down position, the warrior reflects that he's close to reaching the max level of 1 star and will soon attempt to advance to the next stage. While exercising, Jaina touches her stomach and comments on his good taste, but he tells her to move her hand away. Jaina says that Eren probably won't come, and he suggests that maybe he's brooding over the trio's death since he was close to them. The girl thinks Eren should train earlier, and he adds that Dika and 2 others were excited about training. He observes the others training, thinking that they're just trying to avoid being synthesized and only show real effort when the master shows up. The veteran remarks that Zid and Ursher had potential and would have been useful if trained, regretting that they died instead of others. Eren apologizes for arriving late and laments that if he were a little stronger, the other 2 wouldn't have died. The leader states that Zid and Ursher died simply because they were weak. He reflects that it's been a month since he arrived in that world, though probably only 10 days have passed in the real world. From his observations, he realizes the time dilation, concluding that the time difference between the waiting room and Earth is 3 times, and that the game logs in 3 times a day. He concludes that if they had been under the 3 times difference, 30 minutes would have been an hour and a half, and they would have been wiped out. Soon, Isel appears and praises the boy for completing a survival mission using only trash items, calling him the master of masters. Jenna questions Isel's behavior, and he whispers that it's a trade secret. Isel scolds other characters who were slacking off, promising not to leave them alone, but he tells her to ignore them as they'll quit on their own. Finally, a message announces the creation of Group 4, listing the names Han, Gina, Louis, Joffrey, and Owen. Then Isel announces that the 5 will go to the time-space rift, and Gina asks who the others are since she hadn't seen them before. The swordsman assures her that this time it won't be so hard. A daily dungeon screen opens, showing the Kendout Forest, with 11 hours remaining. When he asks for a name, the man introduces himself as Owen and expresses doubt about his usefulness compared to the veteran's strength. Soon after, Group 4 enters Kendoubt Forest, a daily dungeon with the goal of gathering materials, and a tip reminds them that the dungeon type changes depending on the day. Upon arrival, Gina asks where the enemies are, wondering if it's a special mission like the one on the 5th floor. He explains that this place is a daily dungeon for collecting materials. The hunter gathers something he calls trash, explaining that it's like a shopping cart for materials. He instructs everyone to throw the materials they collect into it, giving branches as an example. He also explains that the contents go into the inventory and are used to craft items, and that 100 branches can be turned into firewood by a carpenter. Jaina expresses surprise upon learning they only need to gather and not fight, and he tells her it's different for her and invites her to go hunting. She mutters that she thought she would get to live an easy life and asks what they need to hunt to finally eat meat. Before long, she finds prey, saying she's eager to eat meat. The leader asks if she knows how to clean the prey, and the girl says yes, asking how long he thinks she's been living this way. Soon, she described the process of draining the blood, skinning, and removing the organs from the prey. He instructed Jinna to handle the materials and place them in the dimensional portal, while she asked where he was going, and he replied that he was going hunting because he was tired of eating only potatoes. The warrior looked at a timer, noticing there were about 30 minutes left before they would be sent back automatically. Shortly after, he spotted new prey in the distance. Then he saw the forest queen, a rare monster that appears in forest dungeons. The young man observed a crystal, explaining that low-level attribute stones are used for advancement and that, although they don't appear often, it's easy to approach the area where they show up. He approached the forest queen and taunted her. With glowing eyes and a smile, he invited the creature to attack. Thus, Geoffrey and Owen reacted in alarm upon spotting a monstrous creature hidden in the foliage. Soon, the leader appeared carrying a carcass and asked if they didn't recognize him. Jenna questioned the size of the creature he had taken down, and the hunter, exhausted, asked her to help him. He asked how many animals she had managed to get while she was collecting the creature's blood, and she replied that she had taken down 2 deer and 1 boar, securing food for everyone. Curious, Jenna wanted to know why he brought the animal's head, and he explained that he couldn't cut off the antler. When observing the deer's head with an antler, she asked if it was possible to determine the gender just by looking at it, and the answer confirmed yes, thanks to his time spent in the forest. She acquired the skill Forest Huntress after using her weapon on the carcass, and the observer noticed she had awakened again. Holding a wind attribute stone, he reflected that her progression would be smooth. A table full of roasted meat sparked excitement among the group, who celebrated the chance to eat meat again. Jenna commented that the others were thrilled because they had eaten an entire deer, and a young man asked her to follow him when she finished eating. A detailed explanation covered the daily dungeon system, which changes location depending on the day of the week, with the Sinmaral Plateau being the place to acquire attribute stones. They began the group's entry into Sinmaral Plateau. The girl asked if she could really get stronger by gathering materials, and he explained that something called an attribute stone was necessary, which was what they were there to collect. While admiring the beautiful landscape with the sunset, he praised the view and the pleasant wind of the area. Jinna encountered a life plant she had only seen in drawings, and was informed that the flower was the main ingredient for healing potions and should have been gathered earlier. Next, they were attacked by a giant wolf. The wolf was soon defeated with several arrows and slashes to its body. The archer declared that they weren't struggling to fight the wolf. With the enemy down, he hurried his companions so they wouldn't attract others with the scent of blood, and she agreed. Finally, Jinna asked what to do with the creature's claws and fangs, being instructed to remove and separate them. However, Jinna commented that the area felt peaceful, but was corrected that such a statement could only be made after all the blood had been drained. She expressed a wish to always hunt, gather plants, have food, and a place to sleep. Jenna said it would be paradise if the master weren't around. While the leader thought it really would be better if the master had never shown up, he asked if she didn't want to fight. Holding the attribute stone, he explained that fighting on the front lines isn't the only way, and that she didn't need to worry about being synthesized. Jenna asked if he would take her somewhere else, and he replied that nothing could be done if the situation improved. A question was raised about why he didn't take on other leadership roles. He simply smiled, having nothing to say. A few days later, a group including him and Jinna emerged from a glowing portal for a mission to explore an unknown location on floor 6. Deka joined the group, expressing excitement about working with them. Aaron commented that they weren't in a daily dungeon, and the strategist realized it was an investigation mission. Aaron said he didn't see any enemies and asked if it would be like the 5th floor, and was told not to speak loudly and to keep low. Seeing the others lying down, he corrected them, saying he had asked them to stay low, not lie down. He said the area looked clear and that they would complete the mission if all conditions were met, and Aaron agreed. 3 goblins were spotted, and one of them asked if they should kill the intruders. One goblin was noticed holding a trumpet, indicating they had allies who could be called for reinforcements. He asked Gina if she could see anything from the top of the tree, and she replied that it looked like a goblin village. The archer reported that there were about 100 goblins gathered, and he concluded it was a trap, and they would be ambushed if they went into battle without scouting the area. The commander instructed Gina to shoot the goblin on the right and Aaron to throw his weapon at the goblin he would lure, and both agreed. Aaron advanced and struck a goblin with his weapon. A goblin brought a horn to its mouth. Quickly, the warrior attacked the goblin, preventing it from calling reinforcements. Thus, he was the MVP by finishing the stage, and Dika, surprised, asked if it was already over. The veteran replied that it wasn't yet and that he would scout ahead a bit. A tip for the next stage would be provided, explaining that since it was an exploration, there wouldn't be just one mission, but some things could be anticipated. A bit further ahead was a large village. He observed the goblin village, wondering if it was a large habitat. But before anything happened, they ended up returning through the portal. Gina asked why he had gone out alone, and the boy replied that he wanted to take a look. He reflected that tips were rare and that these exploration missions were called flows, something a master needs to understand. He commented that it wasn't yet time for a flow to appear, that it was earlier than expected. When Chloe alerted him about a problem, she reported that some strange people had arrived, and he said it wasn't the first time. Chloe said that those people seemed different, with weapons and a strange atmosphere, and he quickly realized the time had finally come. 5 heroes had been summoned through a special hero summon. He asked Isel if the master had spent money, and she confirmed that he had bought the beginner help package. Instructing Chloe to return to the kitchen, he also said that the newcomers didn't bite and were just different. The group was dismissed, and Aaron commented that nothing would change just because a few rookies had arrived. A woman in dark clothing was standing next to the residents. Suddenly, Gina approached and greeted her loudly. She then introduced herself as Gina Shirai and asked for the woman's name, who greeted her back. Soon, Edith revealed her name, and the archer began talking about the leader, who told her to shut up. In front of her, the strategist analyzed Edith's skills, identifying her as an agile thief who uses short weapons. He turned to Edith and asked if she had a moment to talk. Then he asked what she knew about the place, and the woman admitted she had little information. He then asked how she got there, but Edith replied that she didn't remember. She revealed she had been summoned to fight and that her head hurt when she tried to remember more, prompting the boy to ask about synthesis. After she defined synthesis as a sacrifice to grow stronger, he deduced from her clothes that she used to be a mercenary. Edith then explained that she belonged to the mercenary group Lobos Gar and had woken up there after a job, while Gina commented that the group's name sounded cool. Soon, it was revealed through cards that Edith was a 3-star mercenary, a rank much higher than Malmut's, who only had 2. With that, Gina showed herself impressed by the information, prompting Edith to ask if she was being serious. Even so, the thief looked away and began to explain the current situation. At that moment, Isel summoned Edith and her group to the city center in the name of the master. Meanwhile, a muscular warrior also heard the summon and loudly asked who was calling him. Right after, Edith recognized the master's call and got ready to leave. Before leaving, the man ate a piece of meat and commented that he was curious to see what the master looked like. Chloe reported that the guy took an entire pork leg because he wanted meat, and that amount could have fed 5 people. Jenna suggested they ask for the meat back, and the strategist said they would go to the city center. A system screen appeared, asking if Group 5 should have its name changed to Lobos Gar, with the option to organize the group by selecting the heroes. The heroes Avant, Jaken, Wape, Beegnan, and Edith were added to the group Lobos Gar, with Avant selected as the team leader. Jeffrey said there was something strange about the newcomers because they had weapons, and the veteran replied that he had one too. He asked if the newcomers looked like bad people, to which Jeffrey confirmed the impression. Then he asked Jenna what she thought of the newcomers, and she said Edith seemed like a good person, but she didn't know about the others. Soon after, he asked Joffrey if he wanted him to protect him, and he replied that he'd appreciate it if he could. Curious, he asked if the help would be free, and Jeffrey stammered before exclaiming that he was strong. Smiling, he asked if their survival strategy wasn't just kneeling and begging the strongest. Ignoring them, he stated that their daily routine consisted of skipping training and eating the meat hunted by Gina. Finally, he declared that the others acted like they were only trying to avoid being synthesized and told them to leave before he lost his temper. Still, he warned Aaron not to sympathize with those who were having fun while he almost died from bleeding. Dika asked if the veteran had noticed that he had been fighting, and his eye wound was mentioned. Aaron explained that it was a simple duel and that Dika had requested it, so the leader told everyone to rest. Then the main wolf group appeared after the stage ended, with one of them expressing dissatisfaction for having faced only weak opponents. The long-haired character asked who the other individual was. Sitting on a bench, the strategist replied that his identity was none of his business. Jaken reacted angrily to the rudeness, which was met with the claim that they had been rude first, while another asked about Gina. The long-haired man introduced himself as Avant, captain of the maned wolf mercenaries, and asked his name, which was promptly given. Avant wanted to know if he was a mercenary because he had a weapon, but he replied that he was just a farmer. After that, Avant asked if the previous gathering included the entire population of that place, and the confirmation was given. A notification announced the start of an X10 summoning, and he questioned the unexpected event. He quickly realized the summoning occurred due to the situation, and the system confirmed the beginning of synthesis with a warning about sacrifices. As people appeared, confused about the location and what was happening, Isel called her master an idiot. She ordered Jakin, Daimon, and Lexical to enter the synthesis room, and when Daimon asked who she was and how she knew his name, he was told to shut up and obey the master. Jakin grabbed Daimon by the neck as he tried to speak while being choked. Gina commented that it was unacceptable, since the newcomers had just arrived. Avant instructed Jakin to grab one more, while he asked who Lexical was amidst the confusion. Jakin advanced towards synthesis, and the observer thought the master was blinded by his first paid summoning. Jana stated that the situation was wrong and questioned how it could be right to do that without giving people a chance. The system explained that one-star people were useless but had talents and shouldn't be discarded without testing, while Jakin felt his power increasing. Isel called for Avant, Soriel, and Daniel, while people reacted in panic, begging to be spared. Thus, Avant and his companions advanced, and he ordered them to go after those trying to escape. Then he asked Edith what she was doing, asking if she wasn't part of the main wolf group. The strategist offered a tip to the master, saying it wouldn't be a waste to test even one-star people, and Isel asked him to wait a moment. He thought he had gone through enough events to change a person since arriving there. Jakin confronted him for standing in his way, and the young man said he was just offering advice. Then he asked the aggressor if his words irritated him. Jakin moved in to attack the advisor. Jenna fired an arrow that passed close to Jakin's face, and she revealed that she missed on purpose. Avant questioned why he raised a weapon against them, while Edith tried to stop the argument but was told to shut up. The captain asked if he knew who they were, and the response was yes. He knew well. The warrior stated that they were trashed. A system message indicated that Avant, Jakin, Napek, and Benyomi were hostile toward him, and that the maned wolf mercenaries had become enemies. Isel ordered them to stop the fight between heroes, as it was forbidden, and asked if they wanted to be punished by the master. The challenger asked Avant if he could speak the truth, questioning if they weren't mercenaries. Avant denied it, claiming they were mercenaries who only acted under contract. The young man told him to stop talking nonsense and called him a bandit. Avant said he was crossing the line and asked if he wanted to be torn to pieces. He then told Isel that people like them only cause trouble and explained that heroes with evil intentions could be summoned regardless of rank. He continued, saying that not only did it ruin the environment, but also lowered efficiency. In other words, they were trash that needed to be eliminated. Finally, he asked for the duel system to be opened. Avant commented that he had never met anyone so crazy, asking what they had done to push him this far. He suggested they just think of it as having run into a rabid dog. He questioned him about asking whether everyone was present to assess the situation, since it would be problematic if someone strong was among them. He declared that newly summoned one-star heroes weren't even good enough as appetizers, and Avant asked if he was suggesting becoming a sacrifice. Jenna wanted to know what he was implying, and the boy explained that if he won, he would consume him, and if Avant won, he would be consumed. The system confirmed that Avant had accepted the duel and declared that it would be fun. Thus, Jana receives the instruction to take everyone back to the residence and asks if Han Ilat will be fine on his own. In response, he expresses great confidence, asking if they really thought he'd lose, and she agrees with a laugh as the system repeats the duel offer. Soon, the duel between Han and Avant is officially announced, and the challenger asks if the opponent agrees that the duel ends when one of them surrenders, receiving a "whatever you want" in response. Then, Avant states that he won't kill him because he needs a fresh offering. In response, Han asks Isel to hide them to avoid any interference, and she asks if he'll really be okay. As soon as the opponent attacks with his weapon, he is surprised to see that the other hasn't even drawn his. At that moment, the fighter evaluates his opponent's stats, observing his level and fencing strength. With that, in his new state, he warns not to act arrogant just because of the level difference. Soon after, Avant launches a sword strike. Next, he's grabbed and slammed hard to the ground. With the blade held close to the rival's neck, a warning is issued. It'll hurt more if he moves. The request for surrender is made as Alan tries to respond. However, he screams, and the other tells him to speak properly. Wake declares that they've lost and will leave, but the swordsman asks if they'll let people walk away with the intention of eating them. At that, Wape intervenes, yelling that the situation has nothing to do with that. With red eyes, the warrior asserts that if he says something is relevant, then it is. He insists that participants must decide the outcome of the duel, which only ends when the loser admits defeat. As Alvin tries to surrender, the other comments that the duel won't end if he can't speak. Holding the enemy's head, he declares that he is his prey and advises the others not to worry about the fight's outcome. Bagnan then confronts him and asks if he knows who they are, while he asks Edith if they're the Lobosgar mercenaries. Edith explains that they used to be called that, but now the situation is different. The warrior finishes her sentence, saying they're just a bunch of bandits now, and questions how they treat her. He asks why she's walking with them, and upon hearing she just follows her father's orders, he advises her to reconsider. He soon asks if Edith will keep walking with bad people or come to his side. He says they're noisy and watches as the enemy tries to grab his weapon. He then slams Avant down and declares, that's what they are. Finally, he invites Edith to join his side, saying he needs one more person, while Jakin reminds her of the cost of betrayal. Thus, Edith agrees, and Han Islet says she should follow the right people, as the system announces she has left the Lobosgar mercenaries. As the others watch, he says there's no reason to keep looking at them and tells them to disappear. Avant surrenders, but the other asks if he'll be okay, questioning whether he might end up consumed by his own power. At that moment, the two remaining men charge forward, cursing the challenger. However, Isel appears and stops them, declaring that the duel isn't over and they can't interfere. They immediately tell her to back off, warning that they'll kill her if she gets in the way. Unfortunately for them, Isel states there will be no second chances. She says she warned them not to interfere, as the system announces that the fighting spirits of the three men have returned to the goddess's embrace and will be remembered forever. The system explains that the cause of death was suicide from stress, while Isel asks Loki if she did well. Avant, still gasping, surrenders. The warrior regains his composure, and the system announces he's been released from the berserk state. Immediately after, he feels a sharp headache, considering it a side effect of the state he was in, and decides to avoid using it unless it's a real fight. With Isel by his side, he comments that the master must be trying to cancel the duel, questioning why he accepted it, and concludes that he didn't even know the duel system existed. Next, the system announces that the challenger has leveled up, and Isel asks what the master will do, lamenting that she couldn't choose the first heroes that were summoned. The system reports that the hero has reached the level cap and that, to keep leveling up, he must increase his rank. He comments that if people like that keep showing up, the waiting room won't function properly, and says the master will thank him later, even if he's losing his mind. Finally, he states that he's already at level 10, close to reaching 3 stars through synthesis, and if the master tries to interfere with him, climbing the tower would have been impossible either way. With glowing eyes, he dares him to give it his worst if he plans to attack. As a crowd gathers, many murmur while watching Han Israt. At that moment, Dika praises him enthusiastically, calling him boss. He quickly scolds Gina, silencing her while she tries to justify having only told the truth. Then, a group of people thank him and report that they were threatened by newly arrived armed individuals. With a sigh, the swordsman explains that they misunderstood and he was already aware of the situation. Then Joffrey assures him that they're not being shameless. They just want to thank him for saving them. With that, the warrior clarifies that he only saved the newly summoned ones who had just arrived. Soon after, he walks away, saying his actions had nothing to do with the others, leaving Joffrey confused. Next, he declares that the master is furious, and Isel demands that Lewis, Joffrey, Owen, Andio, Arnold, and Duncan appear immediately. Quickly, Joffrey tries to calm the crowd, saying they will go hunt goblins as usual. Meanwhile, Gina asks why they called 6 people for the team instead of the usual 5. Under everyone's watchful gaze, he responds that it's because of synthesis. The crowd reacts in shock, insisting that everyone gave their best effort. Then he asks Aaron and Dika if, from their perspective, the newcomers really worked as hard as the veterans. Next, he asks Gina if the new recruits helped her during hunts, and she replies they carried meat and hides. With that, he compares their value to livestock, which enrages a man who demands an explanation. Immediately, the challenger strikes him, telling him to stop complaining. Soon, Isel appears in the air, scolding them for not listening to her and for acting so overconfident. Meanwhile, the crowd begs for help, saying that even the master will listen if the request comes from him. In response, he explains to Gina that Edith is the ideal choice for synthesis, as she's newly summoned and low level. The synthesis is then completed, and Edith Callan, now enhanced, gains the skill Trap Disarm. In front of everyone, the swordsman states that previous identities no longer matter in that place. He then warns that no one will protect them and that, if they want to survive, they must prove their worth. A man complains that he has no talent for fighting, that his hand trembles when holding a weapon, and asks what he should do and if he's just being sent to die. He then names Chloe, Enoch, Walter, and Patrick, asking them to teach their trades to anyone willing to learn. However, an older man comments that the blacksmith trade isn't easy to master. He smiles, stating that with determination, everyone can learn on their own, and if anyone wants to fight about it, he'll deal with them personally. Finally, he instructs that anyone who wants to learn hunting and field dressing should learn from Gina, and carpentry from Enoch, concluding that there are always paths to survival. With a smile, Jenna remarks that the boss is kind, since he taught them a survival method. He reflects that she's not wrong, because if the group follows his instructions, they won't die, and that the confrontation earlier was just him venting his anger. The next morning, Chloe greets him while taking bread out of the oven. He asks what she's doing, and the girl explains it's bread, since the new girl is a baker. After tasting it, he comments that he didn't remember wheat being available, then praises the initiative, suggesting the ingredient might be found in a dungeon. While eating the bread, he asks Edith to follow him to the training grounds. He then orders Jenna to duel the newcomer using short-range weapons, silencing her when she tries to argue that her main weapon is a bow. The two quickly duel, and Edith, surprised, comments on how a child can be so strong. Jenna then wins the fight, and the opponent asks if they were mercenaries or from a famous clan, hearing in response that she's just the daughter of an ordinary hunter. Still on the ground, Edith hears from Jenna that they weren't strong at the beginning either. They only got better through training. Meanwhile, Erin trains hard and complains about the difficulty, but receives encouragement from the leader, who says she can get stronger with dedication. Motivated, she says she'll keep that in mind. As Erin runs in a hurry, the leader wonders if that was the result of the mass synthesis that took place the day before. While Dika strikes a training dummy, he observes the growing number of people and states that if they don't want to die, they'll need to increase their value. Still, he comments that even with that many participants, support slots are limited and the rest will be synthesized. Soon he approaches a boy, who is surprised to be addressed and asks for his name. The young man introduces himself as Escher Roderick, explaining that he was summoned to fight for a master, and adds that he heard what was said the day before. Faced with this, the more experienced one asks about his previous job, and Escher replies that he was a porter for a mercenary corporation, responsible for carrying luggage. He comments that the boy seems fit to fight, and the boy explains that he always wanted to become a mercenary. With a smile, he challenges him to raise his weapon to prove he can be a real one, and Escher accepts the challenge. The system then announces that Escher has achieved synthesis and become level 3. The next day, Jenna complains about the time, questioning why they are gathered so early at dawn. He tells her to shut up and asks the group if anyone knows why they were summoned. Dika suggests that the meeting is to select new members. Jenna then asks if it's not the master who chooses the participants, and he replies that he can at least make suggestions. With papers in hand, he thinks that not even the master would refuse his idea and announces the next step. With a determined look and an outstretched hand, he proposes a wager. He explains that the 6 present will be divided into 2 groups of 3 by drawing lots. To reassure them, he says that this division doesn't mean someone will be excluded. Then comes the announcement. He and Edith will be the 2 group leaders, which surprises her. He immediately excludes Jenna from leadership, which causes her to protest fiercely, claiming she's capable. Edith questions the need for the division, mentioning the risk of one group dying or the stronger members ending up on the same team. He replies that with a small group there's no need to worry, as the master would handle that. He cites the 5th floor as an example, where a big difference in skills put the group at risk because some couldn't keep up. Although it's possible to clear a floor with just one group, future missions will require more people and a contingency subgroup, making it problematic not to use everyone properly. He soon shows the colored papers, stating that red ones will go with him and blue ones with Edith, asking them not to worry, since it's all the same. Then he slams the cup of papers on the ground and tells them to choose. Gina and Erin draw red papers, and she celebrates not pulling a blue one. Finally, he concludes there's no need to check the rest, while Edith says she feels entrusted based on the others' reactions. As Dika tries to explain, Edith cuts her off, saying she already knows. She admits she has little combat experience, as she arrived just recently. Even recognizing the great difference in strength, the leader says that's inevitable. Right after, he warns her that she'll be left behind if she can't keep up. With confidence, Edith replies that they won't lose, as she saw others being synthesized the day before. He then initiates the subjugation mission on floor 7, which consists of eliminating 13 level 8 goblins. Next, he orders everyone to observe as he fights alone. Soon, he enters berserk mode. Gina asks if she should finish off the enemy, but the warrior considers that there's a chance this is a chain mission. He decides to leave the last enemy alive, stating he won't do anything else, and orders them to search for it. As they talk about what to do now that they've finished, he tells them not to overdo it. But right after, he stops Erin from leaving, surprising her with the command. At that moment, Mobius offers him a paid option, and he asks Jenna to bring the blueprints for his room. Then he asks Aaron to bring Edith, and the request is accepted. He announces the arrival of new recruits, and at the same time, a message pops up offering the option to begin a 2x premium summon for 1,000 gems. Finally, he reveals that he already expected that behavior and explains that although some don't always spend money, they all end up giving in and becoming fascinated by playing Pick Me Up, enjoying the autonomy of the heroes. He continues explaining the fun in observing and helping the heroes ascend, giving them orders and instructions, which attracts new players. He also emphasizes that the game involves tactics and strategy in addition to combat, and that the content and behavior of the heroes change as the tower progresses and the environment improves. At that moment, Vivolka and Roderick appear together as they are summoned. Roderick, confused, asks who those people are. Ivolka looks around and realizes that the place is unusual. Gina, upon noticing Ivolka on the ground, asks why she is lying there, and seeing her surprise, the woman explains that she's not hurt and will get up when necessary. Edith informs them that she's a noble, and the revelation surprises the leader. He reflects that although she seems like a mature lady, Ivolka is so embarrassed that she can't stand up. He then describes Roderick as someone who understands the basics of masters, summons, and synthesis, but still knows nothing about levels or skills. He considers him just an ordinary guard with a sense of justice, while Roderick feels compelled to act, asking whether he'll face unknown enemies in that place. The commander agrees to provide more details after the full gathering and informs that he and Edith will handle the recruitment. He explains that when choosing between the blue option for Roderick, a veteran guard, and the red for Ivolka, an immature noble, the obvious choice is clear. He then asks Jenna to bring the papers, and she promptly complies. Looking at the papers, he identifies the right side as red and the left as blue, but feels frustrated that Edith also saw his choice. Immediately afterward, Gina places the container on the ground. He quickly moves to grab the paper on the left. However, noticing fire magic, he decides to grab the one on the right along with Edith. He then asks the woman if she is a mage. Ivolka introduces herself while summoning flames. Edith comments that a mage would be ideal for the group, while the leader, standing next to Gina, says he understands the value of a good man. He explains that mages are rare and difficult to acquire, usually only obtained through paid summons. At that moment, Ivolka asks what they are doing, and he explains they're deciding who she'll stay with, saying that in this kind of situation, you have to depend on luck. She then asks Roderick how she should interpret that, since she was thrown there without warning, and he urges her to think. After a brief silence, he asks if she understood, and Ivolka says the situation doesn't seem good, to which her companion agrees. Jenna then says the choice will be fair and based on luck, but is warned not to respond to the contradiction between fair and luck. Next, the swordsman and Edith agree to accept the outcome of the selection, no matter who is chosen. He holds the red ribbon and declares the decision, asking if there are any objections. Without delay, he announces that Ivolka will now be part of his group. Meanwhile, Isel drags a young man protesting loudly, under Gina's watchful eyes. The boy shouts that this is too much, but Isel orders him into the synthesis. Right after, the leader asks the new girl to go in as well. He warns that if they don't obey, they'll become disposable. The synthesis is then completed, and Ivolka's level increases. Even so, he warns her not to relax, so she doesn't end up like the others. At that moment, Isel throws them both into the synthesis, while the commander explains that it can't be avoided and that one must keep trying harder and harder to survive. Roderick, observing everything, comments on the brutality of the situation, and the other informs him that he and Edith are the next synthesis material. Soon after, Isel opens a rift in space-time. The leader reveals that the master is testing the newcomers, and Isel orders Group 2 to enter the rift. Edith then instructs Roderick to follow her, stating that he will be the protagonist of the battle, and the young man replies that he understands. As Group 2 crosses through the portal, the veteran asks the mage about her spells. Ivolka, in turn, responds to the question by asking why he wants to know. Faced with this, he insists, asking if she doesn't want to fight, while the mage turns the question back to him, asking why they're even there. He asks again if she didn't come to fight, and she expresses her discontent about having to do it in an unfamiliar place and for no reason. At that moment, he asks if she really needs a reason to fight, warning her that if she doesn't, she'll end up like those who were synthesized. With glowing eyes, he repeats the question about what spells she can use. Then he asked again what spells she could use, and she replied that she could use fire magic up to the 3rd level. He also wanted to know about other types of magic, such as teleportation or support, and she explained that support magic was for 3rd-rate mages. For that reason, she displayed a small flame in her hand, claiming that her fire magic level was impressive and superior to support magic. Even so, he regretted that she wasn't as skilled as she thought. considering that support magic is more versatile than offensive spells. Despite that, he assessed that although she hadn't awakened other types of magic, she was still a mage. Meanwhile, in the other group, when questioned by Roderick about her experience, Edith claimed to be a high-level witch. Because of that, he figured Roderick was stronger than he had imagined and then informed Gina and Aaron that it was their turn and they should get ready. With his eyes glowing, he ordered the first group to enter the time-space rift. Soon, he and the young woman stood before the portal with the goal of heading to the 4th floor. At the time, he explained that the higher floors were dangerous and that the 4th, with harpies and goblins, was ideal for testing her type of magic. He then said he would step back once the fight started to observe her spells, prompting a surprised reaction from his companion. Still, he stated that the 4th floor was easy for any of them alone, questioning if she lacked confidence because of her level. Shortly after, he asked if she wanted to surprise him with her magic, and the response came with conviction. It was special. Determined, she said she would surprise him once he saw her spells. On the other hand, Isol, discouraged, wished everyone good luck. Thus, he quickly moved into the portal, which activated after his passage. He then announced that they were on the 8th floor and that everyone should grab their weapons, while Gina and Aaron questioned the switch from the 4th to the 8th, and he told them to shut up. In the end, he wondered if his anger came from being tested with a 3-star mage, deciding he didn't care. Meanwhile, Volka observed the landscape, wondering where she had seen that place before. At that moment, Han Islat warned everyone to dodge. Immediately, he grabbed the mage, who hadn't moved, scolding her for standing still. Right after, he described the mission as subjugation. Eliminate all level 9 goblin knights, noting there were nearly 30 of them. Next, Jinna fired an arrow and was instructed to aim for the goblin leader. Additionally, the young man explained that the terrain was flat and ordered Aaron to charge and attack once the enemies got close. He then called out to his companion, who was still frozen as the goblins advanced. Suddenly, a wolf charged at the shield, taking advantage of an opening, and the leader called out to Aaron. Quickly, the warrior struck the enemy with his spear. Soon after came the instruction for Ivalka to start channeling her spells, even though she was distracted on the battlefield. Surprised, she asked what channeling meant but was told to kill all the enemies without needing a second order, though she responded that she needed time. With that, he asked how much time she needed, and upon hearing 1 minute, he urged her to begin right away, while advancing with his sword. Finally, the mage began channeling, causing an orange glow and streams of symbols to appear around her, forming the spell Lograncidus. Impressed, Han Islat exclaimed that this was real magic and immediately ordered Aaron to block the incoming shots aimed at Gina. The warrior reacted quickly, protecting the archer from the attacks. Then the group's leader noted that while mages were rare, they were extremely effective at mass elimination, even if defeating all those monsters was difficult. In the middle of the process, he asked the channeling mage if she was protecting herself. However, still surrounded by flames, Ivalka seemed to hear nothing. Soon, Gina warned that she would be hit if she kept standing still. Finally, he realized that the girl didn't have a shield and couldn't channel spells while moving. At that moment, a goblin attacked Ivalka with his weapon while she was still channeling. Without hesitation, Han Islat threw himself over the mage to protect her from the enemy's strike. Right after, he scolded her for channeling without any protection. In her defense, she said she was converting magical power into firepower, but he pointed to the forest and said they would change positions. Next, Gina asked if they wouldn't be trapped once they entered the forest, to which he replied that this had already been considered. Then the leader grabbed his companion's hand, who complained about the pain, and ordered that, once inside the forest, they should start firing at the area they were just in. With that, the other two confirmed they understood the instructions as the goblins rapidly approached. Firmly, the archer said they could make it to the point between forest and plains. Without wasting time, he ordered Ivalka to go in immediately, and she asked why she was being treated that way. He instantly explained that this is how people are treated when they can't do things on their own. He then entered berserker mode and realized it was his second time doing so that day, feeling the fatigue but still needing to buy time. As he analyzed the field, he noticed that the enemies were coming from the other side and using a hit-and-run tactic. With that in mind, he decided to focus on eliminating the enemy's mobility. At that moment, Aaron shouted his name. Soon after, a notification indicated that the berserker mode had ended, and he was lying on the ground, being attacked by a large monster. Before being struck, he reacted quickly and hit the creature with his sword. Shortly after, his ally approached and announced he was there, but the warrior shouted for him not to come closer. With determination, he declared he would gather all the enemies and finish them off at once, instructing the others to focus on the ones heading their way. Then he checked whether the mage had finished channeling, while Gina announced they were ready. Consumed by fury, he shouted for the monsters to get out of his way, sending a wave of enemies flying. Finally, with eyes and body engulfed in intense flames, Evolka cast her spell Inferno. At that moment, Han Ilat observed the massive explosive power of Evolka's magic. Meanwhile, Jenna was astonished by the strength of the spell, and Eren watched closely, impressed. Even so, the leader noticed that some enemies had survived and asked the two companions for help finishing them off. Promptly, Eren replied he had been waiting for that. Though exhausted, he decided to fight using his skills, since brute strength wasn't enough to defeat the opponents. With a smile, Jin asked what he thought of the young mage's power and if it had been strong enough for him. Without delay, Eren commented that they would protect him if he got tired, and the warrior replied that they had learned to clear the path. Suddenly, the archer shouted for him to run, warning that the spellcaster hadn't finished casting her magic yet. Then the young man told Eren to fall back, and the other nodded in agreement. Immediately after, with her hair and body engulfed in intense flames, Volka cast her spell Flare. At once, he shielded himself from flying debris, realizing that both he and his ally were about to be hit. Looking around, he saw the destruction caused by the magic and wondered if that had been the end. However, he noticed more enemies approaching, still wrapped in the flames of the previous spell. It soon became clear that a new wave of creatures was heading their way. In response, with arms outstretched and engulfed in flames, the mage cast her spell Incinerate. The powerful spell generated an intense wave of fire that spread through the surroundings. In no time, the fire turned into a massive pillar of flames. Instinctively, Jenna clung to a tree to shield herself from the wave of energy unleashed by the spell. As a result, the forest was completely consumed by the flames of the attack. The fire magic continued expanding, causing widespread destruction. Even so, she remained standing in the midst of the scorching heat of her own spell. Shortly after, Han Islet got up, panting and covered in sweat, still gripping his shield tightly. The spell had created a devastating line of fire that cut across the entire field. With the mission complete, a notification appeared, indicating that Eren and Evolka had leveled up. Surprised, the warrior commented that his companion had defeated more than 20 goblin knights at once and said that was real magic. Smiling, she laughed, stating that it was the power of fire and that she had warned everyone they'd be shocked upon seeing her magic. Next, she introduced herself as the Witch Rivel. Right after, she staggered and fell backward. Desperate, Jenna shouted her name, while the group leader commented that she had used too much mana, which was not good at all. He then explained that the mage needed a full minute to channel, and that the surrounding party members had to protect her at all costs. Reflecting, he noted that the girl didn't use support magic and had strength, endurance, and agility attributes below the 1-star level. Observing closely, he analyzed that few mages had a stat distribution like hers, and that, in this case, firepower was always the answer. Even recognizing the flaws, he considered that her power level made up for everything. In the end, along with the others, he concluded that it was time to acknowledge Evolka's strength. Even so, Evolka questions why she has to go through such harsh training. While complaining about the intense effort and constant mental strain, Han Islat encourages her to keep going, saying potatoes await her, which leads her to accuse him of bribing her with food. Soon after, he reflects that the training is meant to help her dodge better, and, a bit later, asks her to increase the pace, even as Gina grumbles about the exhaustion. Losing patience, the leader scolds her for the annoying whining and highlights the importance of stamina, adding that the current outfit is more suitable, while the mage protests that her old item was a family heirloom. In response, he explains that her dress is a family magic item that boosts fire spells. Casually, he comments that endurance training is not hard for him at all, and that he could even sleep during it, but the girl keeps complaining that she doesn't eat something so barbaric. Soon he quickens his pace, thinking about telling Chloe that the girl wants to eat potatoes while she follows him, clearly irritated. Then he looks at a giant floating eye and notes that now the fun is just in watching, since someone there is doing nothing but observing. Naturally, he narrates that, as they approach the 10th floor, they were lucky to recruit a mage and even managed to open the magic hall. He adds that, due to the dungeons opened the day before, they obtained all 3 types of materials from the weekly instances. He soon reveals that many of those resources had been stored waiting for instructions, and that now was the perfect time to create consumable items, like potions. As a notification pops up saying someone logged out, he comments on it and quickly instructs Jenna not to let Evolka escape, ordering the mage to keep running. Shortly after, he enters the magic hall and looks around, spotting Isel floating up high. As he explores the area, he notices a few available books, but realizes he can't understand them. Even so, he decides to start brewing a potion and points to a cauldron as a starting point. With the ingredients laid out, he reflects on the minigame involved in the alchemy process. He soon begins crafting, performing the actions like a rhythm game and achieving ultra success on a low-grade health potion. He then continues with the production, crafting more potions and getting another ultra success on a mana potion of the same level. Isol, thrilled, celebrates his success in making 6 health potions and 2 mana potions, while the alchemist ponders that water might be suspicious, but the measure is necessary for survival. Because of that, he announces to Gina and Aaron that the group now officially has a mage, and the ally agrees with the statement. Next, he points at the brazier full of hot coals and asks if the others know why it's there. He then extends his hand toward the flames, calling on the others to watch his next action closely. Surprised, the two react with shock, staring at the scene. Finally, he plunges his hand directly into the coals, prompting gasps from his companions. With his hand still submerged in the flames, Han Islat explains that since Ivolka will control fire, everyone there needs to get used to it. Even so, he maintains a focused and intense expression while his arm remains inside the brazier. Meanwhile, Gina and Aaron visibly react with discomfort at the extreme heat radiating from the coals. The warrior's hand stays immersed, enduring the high temperatures without hesitation. He then removes his arm from the brazier, revealing skin damaged and covered in blisters. Despite the appearance of the wound, he lets out a sigh and says that he's fine. He then explains that inside the waiting room, regeneration is fast, and his hand begins to heal with a green glow. He tells his companions that since they'll be fighting alongside a fire user, it's essential to get used to the heat so they don't get burned by enemies. In response, Jin asks if he really expects them to go through something that extreme. Aaron then wants to know how long they'll need to endure the training. Firmly, he answers that they'll continue until they develop fire resistance. He then recalls the episode on the 5th floor and the consequences of Aaron's hesitation at the time. Motivated by the example, the ally decides to plunge his hands into the flames too. Without delay, the leader instructs him to practice in secret, explaining that his demonstration was just an example, and the other says he understands. Even so, the archer expresses her reluctance, saying that she usually stays in the backlines. Still, he offers to help her, holding her hand and trying to place it into the coals, while scolding her for wanting to run every time the mage casts spells. He then explains that the caster can't defend herself or even move while using magic, and if they don't protect her, she will die. He tells Jinna to learn a throwing skill before the 10th floor and then apologizes to Aaron, saying he'll need more from him. Without hesitation, he stabs a knife into his own hand to demonstrate the pain resistance skill. Right after, he tells his teammate that he can find his own method to deal with the pain, offering the knife to help with that process. He explains that while unpleasant, the skill is essential for fighting with potions, and Gina, seeing his hand glowing in the fire, asks if she'll need to do that too. Despite everything, Han Islat says that Jenna won't have to go through the same kind of training as him and Aaron, and she sighs in relief. Next, he stated that she would learn switching, and when asked what that meant, he said to let him explain it later. He soon explained that the technique allowed her to quickly switch between bow and dagger, enabling the warrior to fight at both short and long range, although she replied she was better with bows. Bluntly, he declared that the traditional formation no longer existed, and that from now on, they would form a triangle with Havolka at the center, beginning the new training the following day. He emphasized the mage's importance and said that, although not ideal, there would be times when only he and Aaron wouldn't be enough, and it would be up to Jenna to protect her. Comparing the task to protecting the princess, he stated there was no other option if they wanted to use Yvolka's power effectively. Then he mentioned that the 9th floor was still available, but it was unlikely they would use it, as it would be left for the second group to gain experience. Shortly after, he explained that the 10th floor would require the cooperation of at least 2 groups. Given that, he warned that since it was a cooperative mission, it would be extremely difficult and dangerous, and couldn't be compared to what they had faced so far. Without hesitation, he plunged his hands into the brazier once again, stating they couldn't afford to be lazy during preparations. Finally, a message appeared indicating that he had learned the skill fire resistance. Even so, Yvolka asked Han if he considered her useless, but he replied that what she needed was to learn how to reduce the power, duration, and mana cost of her spells. With that, the young man looked her straight in the eyes and asked if she truly didn't want what he had mentioned. Next, the mage accepted his demands and wanted to know if that was all. While hearing that her fire magic followed a structure composed of 3 parts, he then detailed the steps. The first, to ignite the flames and bring them forward. The second, to extinguish them through an explosion. And the third, to direct that explosion upward. The instructor explained that adding parts to the structure increased the mana cost, resulting in a more powerful effect, but requiring greater efficiency in its use. As he mentioned that the 10th floor was approaching and that they had trained intensely all day, Jenna readied her bow, declaring she would begin the attack. At that moment, Han blocked the projectiles with his weapon and narrated that he was practicing defense against ranged attacks without using a shield, imposing new conditions on his own training. With that, the archer observed that he grew stronger with each session, highlighting how quickly he evolved. However, when noticing another projectile approaching, he warned that they were still in the middle of training and that there was no time for compliments. Soon after, he intercepted another attack with his weapon, and the system announced that he had acquired the skill projectile defense. Then he commented that he had finally achieved what he was aiming for, while his companion prepared a new low-angle shot. Despite that, the strike grazed past and was quickly dodged by him. Standing firm, she then questioned him about switching. Immediately, the two faced off, firmly gripping their weapons. Recognizing her talent, Han admitted that if it weren't for his knowledge, he would be far behind his colleague. He then praised her performance but was teased when she reminded him that he himself had forbidden compliments. In response, he grabbed her face and stated that he could defeat her at any moment, prompting her to apologize. Meanwhile, a regular one-star adventurer would be on the same level as Eren, who had raised his beginner swordsmanship to level 3 and was now training pain resistance alone in his room. At the same time, Ivolka continued her own training in the magic hall, focusing on the first step to avoid failures. Additionally, Han noticed that the groups had not yet reached the maximum of 5 members, and that whatever showed no intention of recruiting more heroes. The next day, he mentioned that Edith's group had returned after exploring the 9th floor. As soon as they arrived, he noticed that some of the members had cuts and asked the leader what the mission had been. Next, she explained that the objective was to subjugate a village inhabited by around 50 goblins, and he wanted to know if there was anything unusual about the location. With that, he asked her to report anything strange she had seen, but she remained silent for a moment. Then she explained that the floor was covered in mud, as if a recent rain had soaked the terrain, and in parallel, her group was seen fighting goblins in that swampy area. Soon after, Aizel called the names of Han, Gina, Eren, and Ivolka, informing them that it was now their turn. At that moment, the young man stated that the 4th floor was no longer sufficient for training, and with that battle, their levels became 10, 6, 6, and 4 respectively. He also commented that everyone had reached the evolution limit and that their levels had been raised to the maximum. Additionally, with the equipment workshop up and running, the C-rank armors were upgraded to B-rank with metal plates, and both he and Eren received secondary weapons. Next, he narrated that 2 individuals from the training fields, Shuron and Makin, were added to groups 1 and 2, even though they had no skills or relevant experience. Soon, Aizel asked him if he had managed to predict the mission and whether he could handle it without difficulty. Han replied that if he had that kind of power, he'd be a god, and asked not to be given useless questions, while the other called him exactly that, prompting a sharp retort. He then declared that, although he was one of the best players, it still took him 2 years to reach the 88th floor, and that while some masters evolved through failure, whatever hadn't experienced that yet. Right after, the scene shifts to a large group gathering and heading toward the portal. Ivolka then questioned the presence of others there, and the answer was that Aizel would soon call them, and that it wasn't something she should question. As always, he acted as if he were fully in control of the situation and believed that the fact whatever hadn't given orders after 30 minutes meant he was still thinking. With that, Han figured the master was weighing whether to risk the 10th floor now or wait a bit longer. He also commented that the new member still hadn't adjusted to the team, having reached the 1-star level cap but not progressed further, as if something was still missing. Though that was the reality for all of them, for the master it was just a game, and as more heroes were pulled in, their deaths wouldn't matter. Because of that, Han instructed Shuron to hide as soon as the fight began, but the newcomer insisted on fighting, which made the leader reflect that someone that inexperienced would only be a burden. He then thought that the master barely knew how to use the tactics room, which was natural for someone just starting out. Shortly after, he asked Aizel to instruct the master to use the items from the warehouse, and she promptly agreed. In his planning, the strategist reported the existence of 6 health potions, with the plan to split 3 per group, and decided that the mana potions would be reserved exclusively for Ivolka. Then he explained that everyone would be placed in separate areas and should regroup as soon as possible, suggesting they head to the center or find high ground to make locating each other easier. With that, Aizel warned them, with a determined expression, not to get in Han's way and said she would be watching all of them. Han Eilat told them not to worry, as he would make sure they ascended the tower. Meanwhile, a man crouched on the ground, repeatedly muttering that everyone was going to die. Holding his head, he screamed that they couldn't win and that no one would survive, women and children included. Right after, Han lightly kicked the man who was prophesying everyone's death. Still on the ground, the man asked who was there, while the warrior thought to himself about that idiot. The man exclaimed that Han must be a ghost, and Gina commented that the old man probably couldn't see them. Then Han reflected on how odd it was that so many NPCs appeared during missions, and how he had always wondered why they never worked together, until now he understood. The leader's gaze turned to the city, which looked strangely familiar to him. Eren agreed, commenting that he felt like he had been there before, though he noticed the city looked a bit different, despite the architecture and layout being recognizable. Finally, Han confirmed that it was true and that they had been to that place before. He explained that it was the ruined city from the 5th floor, except now, it wasn't destroyed. Then Jinna asked about the strangeness of the timeline, but he replied that they'd think about it later. Right after, the leader explained to the group that what mattered was that they had been summoned, and they needed to complete the mission to survive. He also said that the mission hadn't started yet, and that there was still time to gather intel. So he gave the group 5 minutes to scan the area and report back, telling them to return within the time limit. Meanwhile, he observed the battle situation from a high tower window, while a fallen soldier remained on the ground. This way, he noticed the soldiers' morale dropping, and one of them lamented that he didn't want to die. Even so, he narrated the presence of hundreds of goblins in the northern forest, and although he wondered about siege towers, he noted there were fortunately no siege engines. Next, he continued describing the presence of goblins to the east and the absence of siege equipment on their side. Cautiously, he reports that the human soldiers gathered outside the castle seem to be all that remains. Despite that, he reflects on their numerical disadvantage, recognizing the desperate situation, and considers that if the mission is a survival one, their chances might improve. Assuming it's a survival mission like the one on the 5th floor, he predicts they'll complete it easily, since there are NPCs that can serve as bait and a proficient defensive mage. Soon after, he comments that bets will be placed shortly and the second group has joined, so he turns to Edith to discuss the mission. Suddenly, 3 warning signals appear, and the strategist immediately recognizes them as indicators of a high difficulty mission. Given that, the city is shown from above, and he narrates the objective of the 10th floor defense mission, to prevent the city from falling, lamenting that it's not a survival mission. He then details that there are 10 players from both groups and about 360 NPCs, all needing to defend against thousands of goblins. Next, he states that everyone is present and that, after sharing information, they will discuss the mission details, its objective, and everyone's role. Later, Jinna reports that she tried speaking to the townspeople, but no one answered, realizing that even though they could see and touch them, they could not be seen or heard. Meanwhile, Aaron points out on the map that the evacuation is happening in the city center. The north and east gates are under goblin attack, and there is no escape route through the south or west gate. Faced with this, Edith asks the commander what they should do if the outer walls fall, since it's likely they'll all die. In response, he explains that the mission is a defense mission. Finally, he states that they must protect the city from the enemy invasion, which means eliminating the enemies. In disbelief, Edith mutters that it's hopeless. However, Roderick suggests retreating outside the city and using guerrilla tactics to attack from the flanks, but he refuses. In the end, he reveals that the mission's success criteria are to annihilate the enemies, and then he explains the failure condition. He then looks at an angelic statue in front of the bell tower, indicating that it represents the failure condition. Next, the strategist explains that the statue of the twin goddesses is a common object in special missions. However, he states there's nothing they can do about the number of goblins, but if the statue is destroyed, they will lose. Upon hearing this, Roderick, surprised, understands that they need to kill the enemies while defending the statue. Then the commander reflects on what would happen if they failed the mission. In the end, he concludes that everyone will die if the mission isn't completed. Shortly after, Roderick asks if they'll die even if they flee the city, and he replies yes, with no exceptions. Still analyzing the map, the strategist notes that despite the goblins' numerical superiority, only those in the north have siege towers, which would buy them time if the gates were protected. Thus, he instructs Edith's group to head to the north gate to assist the defenders, breaking or pushing down the ladders, and she asks if that's really what they'll do. Noticing Edith's dissatisfaction, he invites her to speak, and the young woman expresses that their numbers won't be enough to defend the city. He then agrees with her concern, explaining that the second group is equivalent to 50 soldiers and the lack of enemy siege engines is a key point. With that, he concludes that the only way the enemies can get through is with ladders, and if they cover the most dangerous parts of the walls, the defense will be more effective. However, Edith states that that's not what she meant. Even so, he agrees that buying time doesn't guarantee victory and acknowledges the limitation. Later on, he narrates that the union of the groups would change little, as the difference in strength between the armies is 10-1, inevitably leading to defeat. Despite the Allied union, he observes that the disadvantage remains overwhelming, and logically, the battle is impossible to win, since the enemies won't retreat. Then, looking at Jinna, he expresses that there must be something, and asks about the river to the east of the city, remembering the 7th floor. In his mind, he visualizes the rain on the 7th floor and the broken dam that created a swift and fierce current. At that moment, Gina has a realization and recalls hearing the sound of horses coming through the river. Under the heavy rain, horses are seen on the other side of the river. Without delay, the strategist instructs Edith to buy as much time as possible, close the castle gates if things get complicated, and use soldiers and civilians as bait if necessary. After that, he turns to his group, stating that they must hold out until the other group returns. In response, Edith says they'll hold out as long as they can. Right after, Gina asks if the strategy meeting is already over and if it wasn't too fast, and he replies that Edith, unlike her, is smart and understood what to do. Worried, Aaron asks if they're going out, warning about the goblins outside and the danger, but the commander replies that yes, they need to go. Finally, under the sound of wind and rain, he concludes that if they stay there, they'll be annihilated. After all, the dam on the 7th floor has already been destroyed, and if the sound of horses means reinforcements, the reason for the city's destruction on the 5th floor was the failure of reinforcements to arrive. To wrap up, he shows on the map that they need to get past the goblins at the east gate and prevent the dam from being destroyed. With determination, he raises his weapon and declares that they're going to level the playing field. Meanwhile, crowds are being urgently directed toward the inner wall, with clear orders to stay in line and advance one person at a time. At that moment, Han Islat and Ivolka barely manage to pass through the inner wall's portal, and he warns that the real problem is just beginning. Right after, the strategist points to the gate leading outside, ordering Jenna to check the wall's situation and Aaron to prepare to open the passage. Then he instructs Ivolka to use her second stage flame magic as soon as the gate is opened. With that, Aaron confirms the command, and the leader notices the presence of another person nearby. At the same time, as Aaron pulls the lever to open the gate, the passage starts to open unexpectedly on its own. Immediately, nearby soldiers run and express confusion upon seeing the gate open by itself, while one of them wonders about a new sound. Meanwhile, Jenna reports to the commander that goblins are gathered outside and questions whether opening the gates will trigger a mass attack. However, even with the warning, he ignores the issue of the opening and states that Ivolka will clear the path with magic, deciding that they'll stop the soldiers from interfering. In response, the soldiers rush forward in alarm, questioning the situation and ordering the gates opening to be stopped at all costs. Soon after, Jenna acts, taking down one of the soldiers with a sweeping kick. At that moment, Ivolka begins casting a powerful spell, Le Grand Intigio. Soon, a bright light shines through a gap. At that exact moment, an arrow flies through the gate. As the arrow approaches, the strategist blocks it with his arm while Ivolka unleashes her magical attack. Immediately, creatures with red eyes and sharp fangs peer through the gap in the gate. Without hesitation, he quickly reacts by throwing the arrow back. Then Gina stops a soldier mid-jump as he shouts about a ghost and wonders if they've been abandoned. Meanwhile, Han Islat is under heavy rain, observing the downpour. Despite that, Ivolka keeps her flames burning under the rain, wondering if it will extinguish her power. At the same moment, Aaron shouts while raising his weapon, charging forward through the rain. In that scene, multiple goblins rush forward with bared fangs and glowing red eyes. In response, Ivolka unleashes a massive explosion of fire, engulfing the entire area. Quickly, he instructs Ivolka to direct the explosion outward to avoid damaging the gate. As a result, the creatures are struck and thrown back by the force of the fire blast. Soon, the gate is engulfed in intense flames, its structure still visible through the fire. Immediately, he calls out to Gina and Aaron, and she replies that she'll go ahead. Without delay, the strategist hands a vial to Ivolka, instructing her to drink it every time she uses her power. Finally, he turns to the mage, asking if she can keep going even though she's just getting started. To that, Ivolka affirms that she can, and asks what other reason he'd have to bring her there. Right after, the strategist asks Sharun if he still plans to follow them, and the system reports that Sharun is frightened, which lowers his stats. So he orders the man to go to Edith, who will instruct him on what to do, and promises to acknowledge him if he survives the battle, while the man runs off in agreement. Immediately, the commander realizes that the escape route is blocked. With no other option, he declares that the only path now is forward and threatens to kill anyone who stands in their way. He then commands everyone to take their positions, with Gina, Ivolka, and Aaron by his side. Next, he instructs Ivolka to use stage 1 of her fire power to spread the flames and cover as much area as possible, and she agrees. Meanwhile, creatures are burned by the flames as they advance through the fire. Then he moves in to attack and protect the mage while she maintains her casting. With force, he strikes a creature with his weapon, sending it flying backward. During the scene, he observes and states that they were lucky Ivolka joined the group as more creatures are consumed by the flames. He quickly realizes that the rain is rapidly extinguishing the fire barrier and shouts for Ivolka to renew it while fighting off the creatures. At the same time, he instructs Aaron to handle the right flank, and the ally responds that he will. With precision, The strategist counts the time, noting 20 seconds remaining. As the timer hits 0, he moves swiftly and orders everyone to change positions. Immediately after, massive flames hit everything around them. Farther ahead, a large number of goblins await them, along with their commander. Meanwhile, an imposing creature with horns and a red flag watches. Soon after, it commands its troops to advance. Faced with this, Han Islat, surrounded by fire, shouts for everyone to move forward. Next, the enemy hurls its weapon toward the strategist. At that moment, he wonders if the goblin's attack pattern has suddenly changed. However, he observes the enemies advancing relentlessly, even after being struck by fire magic. Therefore, he quickly cuts down all opponents charging at him. Then he realizes something important. The horned figure is revealed in silhouette against the fire, and he comments that it's because of her that all this is happening. Reflecting, he thinks the creature knows that Yvolka's magic takes time to cast, which is why they keep advancing without fear, meaning they've figured out the plan. Thus, he concludes that the enemy is far too intelligent. Even so, he acknowledges that although Eren and Jenna seem fine, they won't last long in this low-oxygen environment surrounded by fire. With that in mind, he continues thinking that although fire resistance is a skill that increases tolerance, it does not grant immunity. Then he shouts for everyone to gather around him. With Eren and Jenna nearby, he warns them that he'll only say this once and they can't fail, because they have only one chance. Startled, Eren asks what chance he's talking about. Immediately, the strategist explains that he's talking about the chance to destroy that monster with decorations in the middle. Meanwhile, the horned creature roars again, watching them through the rain. Yvolka, focused, begins casting another spell, preparing a new blast of flames. At that moment, several creatures charge toward them in a swarm. Without delay, the mage unleashes a new flame explosion, creating a circular barrier that surrounds them. Right after, the group leader strikes the creature, throwing it backward. Urgently, he asks Yvolka if she has finished channeling while he prepares to attack the creature, and the mage focuses on burning the enemies. Next, she releases a massive fire blast with a flick of her hand. However, more creatures advance. Faced with this, Han Islat thinks that using magic only once might not be enough. Even so, Yvolka unleashes a powerful attack that incinerates the enemies. Meanwhile, the creature's leader watches this scene safely from his throne. Jaina and Eren ready themselves for battle. Soon, Jaina's arrow is fired, soaring through the flames. At last, the arrow hits the leader's face directly. Exhausted, Yvolka collapses after spending so much mana. Then he picks her up, saying she doesn't need to say anything. Despite the partial victory, he warns that magic, no matter how strong, isn't enough to wipe them all out, and that without time to regroup, they'll be annihilated. Faced with the situation, he concludes that the enemy's objective isn't them, but the fortress, and that they are merely an obstacle, questioning whether the creatures would risk their lives for the final objective. Soon after, Han Islat wonders what they'll do now that their commander is gone. From a safe distance, everyone watches the fire circle and the creature army, which ignores them and continues toward the fortress. Firmly, the strategist states that they've moved past the enemies, who now have no interest in them, and are heading for the fortress. Next, he explains that they survived because they killed the creature's commander, and if he were still alive, the plan would have failed, and he would have tried to kill them. Then he suggests they rest and use healing potions, instructing them to apply the potion to their burns and take a sip, as there's only one left for each of them. Meanwhile, he observes the outer wall under siege, wondering if it still holds and if the other group is still fighting. Still deep in thought, he considers that this is only the beginning for them as well, while approaching the bridge. However, more goblins advance with their weapons. Sensing the approach, he understands that the enemies won't give them a break to rest. Without delay, he commands everyone to prepare for battle, as a group of 19 level 9 goblins is approaching, and they barely had time to recover. At that moment, Eren calls out to his leader about something. The strategist replies that yes, this time will be different, with a confident smile. Then, a giant ogre appears. The level 23 ogre roars again, and Han Islat comments that they brought in a big guy. Thus, Han Islat assigned the roles, instructing Yvolka to extend a wall of flames to block the goblins and asking Eren to protect her. Even though they could stop the goblins, he realized that the monster was far too big to be stopped by the flame wall. Without hesitation, he told the creature to shut up and said he'd handle it himself. The ogre soon attacked with force, raising a massive explosion on the ground as the strategist dodged away. With that, he concluded that if he got hit, he would die instantly. From there, he realized the shield would be useless against the creature's strength, and his only option was to cut it down bit by bit. As a result, the flame wall isolated the enemies and allowed him to approach the creature. With a quick move, he charged at the ogre and struck it with his sword, making it scream. Meanwhile, Jaina raised her bow and got ready to fire. Soon after, Jaina's arrows struck the ogre. At that moment, he saw the ogre being hit and realized the attack was effective. Next, Jaina commented that since the ogre was big, it was easier to hit than the goblins and that it couldn't dodge the attacks. As the arrows kept hitting the target, the warrior stated that goblins were much easier to deal with. However, he realized that the ogre wasn't dodging because it didn't need to, and that attacks would only be effective if they struck vital points, wondering if the monster had a weak spot. At that moment, Jinna called for him, warning about the arrival of another ogre, which would be a big problem. Faced with that, he noticed that the goblins were weakening the block at the flame wall, and that another ogre arriving would put them at a disadvantage if things stayed the same. As the situation got worse, he decided he would have to take the risk in combat. He soon revealed that the ogre had a vital point, realizing that it was also a man. As he moved, he quickly dodged the enemy's attack, which smashed the ground. With precision, he pierced the creature's leg with his sword. Then he jumped onto the ogre, and even as the creature screamed, he realized the strike had been shallow. Even so, he attacked again, declaring he didn't care. The warrior's weapon was deeply embedded in the ogre, causing heavy bleeding. As soon as he jumped away, he confirmed that this ogre had been defeated. He then turned, getting ready for the next target. As another ogre charged toward Ivolka, he asked Jinna to draw its attention with her arrows. At the same moment, Jinna fired her arrows at the creature. However, the ogre was about to strike Ivolka, and he realized it was too late for her to dodge. So he shouted Ivolka's name. The ogre charged past her, knocking her down. Ivolka was shocked to see the enemy so close. At that moment, he remembered an old doubt about the destruction of the dam on the 7th floor, which had been broken with holes in the ground by something very powerful. Right then, Han Islet realized the ogre's target wasn't Ivolka, but the dam. Immediately, he shouted Gina's name as she prepared to strike the ogre. Soon after, Gina's dagger hit the enemy, which let out a loud scream. Without hesitation, he rushed forward at high speed, asking if the ogre really thought he'd let it do that. With focused eyes, he declared that the ogre would die there. Then he jumped and delivered a powerful blow against the creature. With the strike, the ogre staggered and fell into the water. The fall caused a huge impact on the surface. Right after, Han Islet looked at the water, saying he barely managed it. However, the ogre's hand burst out of the water violently. With a brutal attack, the creature destroyed the entire bridge. As a result, a massive splash of water erupted from the bridge's collapse. Next, Aaron informed his leader that they had dealt with the remaining goblins and asked what they should do next. However, the commander remained silent. Faced with the situation, he looked at the ogre still in the water and said that they had failed. With concern, he explained that reinforcements from the forest on the other side of the dam would soon appear, and that the strong river current would prevent them from crossing. While thinking about the situation, he concluded that they would have to stop 3,000 goblins on their own, while Aaron called to him. Finally, in that moment, he reflected on what they should do next. Despite that, Han Islet told Aaron that they should go back to create a plan B, although in his mind he questioned whether such a plan even existed. With that, Ivolka ordered everyone to wait, making the swordsman question her decision as they remained under the rain. As soon as the mage raised her hands, she activated a powerful spell, surrounding herself in a purple aura. Soon, the rock was lifted by her energy. Quickly, the stone was brought to the broken bridge, restoring the path. The warrior questioned why she had hidden her telekinesis, but the companion confronted him, saying the mission would have failed without her help. After he insisted on knowing why she had hidden her spells, reminding her of the order to disclose all magic, he still admitted that they were alive because of her and acknowledged that the operation would have failed without Ivolka's help. At that moment, Jinna shouted the leader's name, saying the goblins had returned in large numbers, surrounding them. A goblin lunged forward with its weapon. Quickly, the swordsman dodged the attack. He countered, striking the goblin with his sword. While Aaron and Jinna fought, he thought it had been a while since the reinforcement phase began with no signs of support, which made him anxious. Suddenly, he was struck by an impact and questioned himself about whether he had been wrong. He wondered if the reinforcements never existed, and then ordered the mage to drink the remaining potions and use a second-level spell. At that moment, a large winged creature attacked from above toward his companion. Desperate, he shouted Ivolka's name. A massive monster appeared before her, but before it could strike, a knight saved her from the creature. The savior charged through the monster swiftly, passing by their group. Then a knight in full armor appeared on horseback, wielding a weapon. The swordsman turned to observe the mounted warrior. The knight raised his weapon, proclaiming the Iron Lion Cavalry and demanding they show their strength. Next, the cavalry continued advancing through the water in a coordinated charge, joining the battle as allies. He told Aaron and Jinna to hurry over to Ivolka. It was noted that the cavalry numbered around 500 men. Even in fewer numbers, they seemed stronger than the city guards. With the human cavalry now present, he pondered that their job seemed done, and that they could simply watch, but wished they truly could do that. At that moment, he asked if they knew how to ride a horse, and Jinna answered yes, but he himself did not. He explained that masters usually couldn't interfere directly in battle, but could influence it, for example, by requesting a beginner horsemanship skill book. Soon, a beginner horsemanship skill book appeared with a cost of 500 gems. asking if he wanted to purchase it. He explained that horsemanship was one of the skill books for sale in the combat shop, and although he couldn't learn combat skills, he acquired the skill beginner horsemanship. He mounted the horse, responding that he now knew how to ride after previously saying he didn't, while the others were also mounted around him. Finally, he declared that now that the battle was a bit more balanced, they would begin their counterattack. As they rode, Han Ilet explained to Ivolka that the hobgoblins wouldn't pose an immediate threat until the gates fell. While observing the castle map, he noticed the concentration of enemies with siege ladders to the north, precisely where the cavalry was heading. Under the rain, he reflected that success wouldn't come as easily as it seemed. Then he shouted for everyone to get out of the way, declaring they would move away from the battlefield. Aaron questioned the decision not to defend the northern gate. Still riding, he ordered everyone to move out of arrow range and head for the northern forest. Soon after, he noticed the rain had completely stopped, which he considered a perfect moment. The group advanced quickly on horseback along a path. Through the trees, a vast group of goblin riders was waiting, and the strategist proposed using the companion's magic to block the path and stop them. With that, the presence of 23 ogres was revealed in the area. Aaron warned about the risk if the goblin riders joined the main forces, explaining that the cavalry wouldn't have enough support. Ivolka responded that she still had magic, though not with the same power as before. He instructed the mage to focus on the spell's area of effect and declared they would cross the northern forest from that point on. She was ordered to use her magic to burn down the entire forest. At the castle, an enemy climbed a siege ladder. Amid the battle, Dika defended himself from the goblin attacking him. Then he shouted that he was falling. Edith struck the enemy, saving him at the last moment. Then, a mounted knight ordered all forces to advance. The knights charged to display the fiery strength of the Iron Lion cavalry. Edith and the others realized the reinforcements had arrived and that the plan had worked. She shouted for everyone to hold on, as victory was near. Meanwhile, Ivolka focused and declared she would set the forest ablaze. The flames rose and spread through the woods, striking the enemies. The swordsman watched the mage, considering that she would soon run out of mana, and the forest battle would come to an end. But that didn't matter. They would burn everything. He reflected that destroying the forest was the best thing to do, since it was a place suitable for goblin reproduction, and that would stop them continuing the defense of the city. He reported that around 100 soldiers were fighting on the northern wall, and that the defenders had suffered many losses before the cavalry arrived. The mounted troops proved extremely strong, facing the enemies with vigor. Even outnumbered, their skills surpassed the difference, and they continued to fight. The battlefield was filled with fallen enemies, signaling the end of the clash. Next, the cavalry raised their weapons in celebration, declaring the mission over and shouting glory to the goddess. Hesher and Dika celebrated surviving, while Edith just watched. From the tower, Edith called out to Han Ilat as they rode toward the castle gates. Finally, she stated that no one had died and that they hadn't received any abandonment messages, while Aaron commented that they were very different from before. Then Jinna asked why they hadn't returned yet and if the mission wasn't already complete. He kept a tense expression as the scene around him shifted to reddish tones. Even though he had thought they had already dealt with all the monsters, there was still uncertainty. Despite the battle and the absence of more enemies, the stage-completed message hadn't appeared, leaving him wondering what was left to do. The scene seemed to be loading, with the swordsman on horseback in a distorted environment. 3 transparent figures were being restored. Then a server error message appeared, indicating a disconnection. At that moment, he realized everything had stopped. He was soon instructed to turn around. In the distance, he spotted the figure of another character on the distorted horizon. Suddenly, a shadowy level 999 figure appeared amidst the fire and visual distortions. He clenched his teeth, showing his reaction to the creature's presence. Meanwhile, he reflected on the distorted image of a monstrous being with red eyes from his memory. Finally, he recognized the figure as the same from an earlier time. At that moment, he recalled being the first to clear the 88th floor in Korea and rise to 5th place globally with the support of his heroes. While the game Pick Me Up connected, he thought about how it involved drawing heroes, skills, and that battles depended entirely on luck. He reflected that, even though general instructions could be given, combat was automatic and heroes chose when to use their skills. What attracted him most to the game was the belief that skill surpassed luck, as shown by the various missions and tower floors. However, he wore an expression of anguish in the current situation. It was then that he identified a shadowy level 999 figure, which he found absurd for exceeding the standard limit. With glowing eyes, he showed his rage. His eyes widened when he saw a second shadowy figure, a level 15 dark priest, beside the more powerful entity. Both shadowy presences, the level 999 and the dark priest, remained still. The priest stared at him with red eyes and a smile on his face. The creature declared that it would be waiting for him. Soon both figures vanished, leaving him behind. With a recovery successful message and reconnection to the server, he was back in the game scene. Jinna asked him about his expression, noticing that something was bothering him. Without answering directly, he shouted his companion's name, ordering her to ride to the castle, and she reacted with surprise. With a tense face, he stated that it wasn't over yet. He quickly identified the Dark Priest as a never-before-seen monster from the lower floors. Then he thought about corpse resurrection, a skill he associated with that sinister figure. He knew that, under certain conditions, these enemies turned the dead into creatures that attacked relentlessly, unless their heads were destroyed. Edith shouted for the gates to be opened, while he reflected that that monster should never have appeared so early in the tower. As the gates opened, Aaron and Gina advanced on horseback. The girl looked back, realizing that he was standing still. He informed her that he would leave Evolka with her, and the girl cried out in surprise. He instructed Gina to regroup with Edith at the outer wall, near the statue of the goddess, and to hold out until he returned, at which she called after him. Aaron then questioned him, saying he couldn't do that with so many monsters nearby. Calling his ally by name, he gave him a focused look and told him to wake up. He asked if Aaron would return alive with him or become food for the approaching monsters. Determined, Aaron responded that he would return with him. Right after, Jenna called out to him, wanting to know if he would really come back alive. Coldly, he asked if it was really necessary to ask something so obvious. Evolka, watching closely, asked him not to die. In response, he replied that the same applied to her. Then he rode ahead on horseback, leaving the gate behind. He advanced as a large creature and other monsters approached. In the end, he thought that although strange and frightening, those enemies were harmless when alone. Thus he concluded that the real danger only emerged when the monsters were not alone. He reflected that he would die if he tried to face all the enemies at once. As he advanced, an arrow struck one of the creatures. From atop the wall, Gina, with her bow, observed the scene. At that moment, he mentally questioned what she was doing. Soon after, an explosion hit the city gate, destroying it and opening the way for the monsters. A giant monster and smaller ones approached a defenseless soldier. He realized that the gates had been destroyed. Without hesitation, he charged on horseback, determined to deal only with the spellcaster. He quickly realized that the enemy had disappeared into the burning forest, where it now awaited him. With a determined expression, he began attacking the monsters, convinced that they didn't stand a chance. At that moment, he reflected that the enemy's movements followed two basic principles. Thus, he realized that their first goal was to destroy the goddess statue. In addition, the second principle was a hunger for living beings, even though their combat skills were worse than when they were alive. However, the craving for flesh increased abnormally, making them more dangerous near other bodies. Faced with that, he concluded that this seemingly random attack pattern existed only to make the situation harder. He regretted not having two bodies to deal with so many problems at once. While fighting, he observed that Edith's leadership and combat skills were far more impressive than he had imagined. With that, he reinforced in his mind that the absolute priority was protecting the goddess statue. Then he planned the defense, hoping Gina and Aaron's experience would help hold the inner gates. Suddenly, a crowd of people ran in panic, not understanding what was happening. Next, everyone gathered at the castle gates, begging to be let in. They shouted that there was still space inside and pleaded for help, as they had nowhere to run. He realized that the situation depended on how quickly he could deal with the Dark Priest. Soon after, a notification informed him that his fire resistance had increased to level 2 as he walked through the flames. Immediately, he advanced and struck with his weapon amid the fire. Then he drank the contents of a potion vial. Suddenly, he realized he was at the edge of the map. Then he stated aloud that he knew the enemy was present in the area. With his weapon in hand, he waited in the flames. Soon, a projectile of dark energy descended rapidly toward him. The attack hit him directly on the shield. He analyzed that although the Dark Priest's combat skills were low, his current strength was higher than normal for this floor. Even so, he took a few steps back, dodging some projectiles. Immediately, he concluded that his projectile defense had prevented him from being defeated. As he caught his breath, he noted that the smoke and dust in his lungs were worsening his condition. With that, he realized that he didn't have any more time and had to act before his group was wiped out. Suddenly, a voice from the enemy called out to him, saying it wanted to talk. He questioned the request but agreed to hear what the creature had to say. The priest then stated that he was different from the others, and as a gift, hurled a dagger at him. Next, the swordsman entered his berserker mode, charging at the enemy. In response, the Dark Priest cast a spell with multiple energy circles. Soon after, energy projectiles pierced the warrior's body. Even wounded, he managed to land a direct strike on the creature's chest. With that, the enemy collapsed from the impact of the attack. Finally, the Dark Priest fell to his knees on the ground. After the fight, the combatant remained standing over the enemy, breathing heavily. Then he coughed up a large amount of blood due to his wounds. Leaning against a tree, he wondered why the stage-clear message still hadn't appeared. With that, he questioned whether the battle had truly ended. He then concluded that he had reached his limit, and no longer knew how to proceed. He reflected that he would probably die before the goddess statue was even destroyed. In his thoughts, he lamented having been dragged to an unknown place only to die after so much suffering. Meanwhile, the scene showed Gina and Aaron struggling to fight off the monsters. The view expanded, revealing that Ursher, Dika, and even Roderick, near the statue, had also been overwhelmed. In the end, the statue of the goddess remains standing on its pedestal. Suddenly, it glows with a blue light and begins to disintegrate into particles. At the same time, the wounded swordsman's body is also enveloped by the same light and starts to disintegrate. Thus, the stage-completed message appears as the entire scene distorts and disappears. Slowly, he opens his eyes. Lying in bed, he realizes he's still alive. The scene shifts to the outside of the lodging at night. Inside, Aaron is sitting alone at a table. Soon, a voice asks him why he looks so down. Seeing him, Aaron comments that he finally woke up, and the swordsman asks why he was thinking so deeply. In response, the ally says he was reflecting on the reason behind their fight. He then explains that after his companion left the gates, bodies began flooding the city. He concludes that many NPCs must have died. With that, Aaron gets up to leave, while the other thinks his stress level has increased. Before he leaves, he asks if he'll return like that the next day. Turning with a smile, his friend assures him he'll be fine by tomorrow. And so he leaves the place, leaving the protagonist alone at the table. The next morning, a banquet is served on the lodging's table. Gina asks why there's such a lavish meal, and the cook explains it was his request. While eating, he asks if she didn't like it, but Gina confirms that eating is always good. He thinks that fortunately, Gina is acting normal and Aaron seems better. He also notices that Evolka is still behaving the same as always. Next, he sees Edith comforting Dika, concluding that he'll need time to recover. Soon, a notification appears stating that a hero himself is waiting to advance, which requires the construction of an advancement hall. After confirming the construction, the advancement hall is completed, allowing heroes to advance. Inside the hall, 3 stones are placed on a magic circle with the option to synthesize. Upon confirmation, the circle activates with the inscription Fairy Power. The Fairy Isel then appears with a low-grade advancement stone, congratulating him on the completed synthesis. She tells him he'll be graduating from 1 star and encourages him to conquer the tower, but he doubts he'll ever reach 7 stars. Isel laughs and asks who else would manage that, while he thinks that Cirrus would already be at 7 stars if that were the case. He reflects that he's never obtained a 7-star hero, concluding there must be a special condition for it. Soon, he prepares to enter the advancement hall, the additional facility from the synthesis hall. Before the door to the 2nd floor, he understands that by entering, he'll ascend to the 2nd star. Inside the advancement area, he knows this is one of the places the master cannot see. He then reflects that, since the hero only appears after inserting the ingredients, the master has no way of knowing what happens inside. With that in mind, he places the advancement stone at the center of the magic circle. Next, he positions himself as the ritual begins. A pillar of energy rises from the circle, enveloping him completely in the process. After a flash of light, he finds himself in a dark space and opens his eyes. There he sees a woman holding a baby in her arms and calling him a good boy. Suspicious, he partially draws his sword and asks who she is. As he tries to approach, he realizes he can't reach her due to an interference barrier. Watching the scene, he continues to wonder about the identity of the child. As the woman tells the baby to sleep, he thinks that he never had a family and that the child isn't him. Then he reveals that the baby is the real Hannislat, the one who was originally supposed to be sent there in his place. He concludes that since he doesn't understand the situation, there's no reason to waste more time there. He is soon transported to a dark place and wonders if it's the waiting room. Noticing the absence of any facilities, he dismisses the possibility of it being whatever's waiting room. Then, a glitching portal materializes in front of him. From the portal, a small fairy emerges, and he asks if it's Isel. He notices the fairy is smaller and can't speak but understands her instruction to enter the space-time rift. The rift takes him to a large door labeled Extreme Difficulty Advancement Dungeon. As the door opens, a system notification announces the dungeon's activation. Immediately, warning alerts pop up, causing him to drop to his knees. A notification states that his stats have been reduced by 30% due to the fear condition, and he reacts to the pressure. In response, the system announces that he has entered a berserk state. Soon after, a new message informs him that he has escaped the fear condition. A shadowy level 999 entity materializes, saying that they have finally met. Upon seeing it, he questions how that figure is even there. He then thinks to himself that he is sure it was this entity that brought him to this world and that he deeply wants to kill it now. He remembers that it was this creature who wiped out Dior's group in seconds, while the enemy taunts him for not attacking. Clenching his teeth, he demands to be sent back if it's only going to talk. The entity laughs and comments that he would have died much earlier if he hadn't controlled himself like that. Feeling a headache, he wonders if all hero advancements are like this. In response, the creature says he knows it or not, because he is a special existence. The figure continues, explaining that that stage was prepared just for him, the glorious ranker of Pick Me Up. With a hand on his head, he asks what exactly the entity is. The shadowy figure then begins to answer. Although he thought there was a resemblance to Isol for some reason, Han Ilet comments that he doesn't know how to introduce himself. Along the same line, he considers that maybe Isol would look like that when grown up, but then calls her a bitch, dropping any formality. Even so, the woman comments that the situation is a little complicated. Soon after, she confirms the resemblance and corrects him, saying that actually Isol is the one who looks like her. Casually, she reveals that Isol is one of her copies, number 100,479, to be exact. With a provocative tone, she asks if that number doesn't remind him of the number of players in Pick Me Up. Next, she displays a business card identifying her as the president of Mobius Corp. Surprise, Han Ilat asks if that's some kind of joke, but she explains that she uses different names depending on the situation. With eyes glowing, he asks if it was her who brought him there, already anticipating the answer. Calmly, the woman asks him not to hate her so much, saying that his summoning was also unexpected. According to her, it was all an accident, but the young man says he doesn't care about her situation. Surrounded by an aura, he threatens her, demanding that she send him back if she doesn't want to die. However, with a smile, she questions whether a one-star hero isn't dreaming too big by threatening her. Even so, Han Ilat firmly states that his rank will change over time. Faced with that, the woman stares coldly at him and declares that killing him right there would be the best answer. Without hesitation, she launches an energy attack in his direction. The projectile hits the young man directly in the chest. The energy remains embedded in his body, which quickly starts to bleed. Coldly, she praises his bravery, saying he didn't even blink when the spear touched his heart. Even wounded, Han Ilet asks what she truly wants. While suspecting there must be another reason behind all this, the woman claims she just wanted to talk. Without hurry, she approaches and reveals she's a fan of Loki, the fifth in the rankings, saying she monitored him and that Niflheim was also a priority. With that, she explains she came to tell the truth about that world. Despite the still visible wound, Han Ilet listens as she asks what he thinks about the game's story. In her explanation, she comments that gacha players usually ignore the plot, focusing only on the content. Agreeing with herself, she says that the narrative of Pick Me Up is, to be honest, pretty outdated. She further adds that most masters don't even discover the existence of the game's world. Faced with this, she asks if he knows where the mentioned city is. Uninterested, the young man replies that he doesn't care, and the woman finally apologizes and admits she likes to brag. Thus, she reveals that they are in the city of Nelsa, on the continent of Taunir, and points out that everything there is completely destroyed. Soon after, she shows several ruined cities. Finally, she states that this is the condition of all areas in Taunir. With a smile on her face, she asks if he believes Niflheim is in a different situation. As she walks away, she explains that all continents connected to Mobius have been destroyed and estimates that more than 10 million worlds were wiped out at once. Bluntly, she declares that the end of the book has already been sealed as a bad ending, where everything will come to an end. She continues, explaining that the characters in the book have different destinies, and that their mission is simple. She then reveals that they must bring the truth out of the book. She claims they have to fix and rewrite the story, even if that causes the collapse of space-time. She soon concludes that this was the reason for the creation of Pick Me Up. With a slight smile, he comments that he was curious what kind of grand story she would tell. Next, he asks what the point is of telling him all that. The woman then asks for his cooperation, and the young man repeats the word, showing distrust. Even after striking his head before, she invites him to save the world by her side. With a gesture, he says he figures he hears something like that, but concludes that it's all nonsense. Unshaken, she urges him to think about the proposal and asks if he accepts or refuses. Annoyed, the challenger tells her to shut up, demanding to know how she can ask for cooperation after making him suffer. He then rejects the offer and challenges her to kill him, stating he'll crush her head first. With a sigh, the woman comments that he's very stubborn and says she's hurt. Even so, Han Ilet thinks it's all just a bluff, since he still can't defeat her, and demands to be sent back. With a disappointed tone, she says he wounded her and explains that it took a lot of interference to bring him there. Still, she expresses her admiration for Loki, saying that the other masters don't compare to him. Right after, she reveals the reason. He achieved a unique accomplishment, referencing the phrase about trusting in bonds with heroes. He immediately recognizes the phrase as part of the tutorial completion notification. She emphasizes that, among millions of masters, he was the only one who understood the true meaning of that message. Without warning, she transports him to the 80th floor of Niflheim. 6 months in the past, revealing that only 5 users ever made it there. Immediately, the young man recognizes the frustrating 80th floor and asks why they're in that place. Casually, the woman invites him to watch a scene, conjuring a chair for each of them. Finally, she tells him to sit, saying he'll need to be comfortable for what he's about to see. Then the woman asks Han Ilat if the vision before them, seen with their own eyes, isn't majestic. At that moment, he reflects that the 80th floor, a conquest stage with random difficulty, was known as the Wall of Lamentations. Firmly, he states that he knows how to complete the challenge and asks what the point is in watching a replay of his own victory. In response, she says there's no reason at all and suggests he just wait and watch to understand. He soon remembers that when facing the 80th floor, he suffered a humiliating defeat that wiped out nearly all his forces. The environment at the time was described as a true hell, an extreme place where no new life could thrive. Then, the fragments of chaos, despair, and resentment appear. Han Ilat explains that it was those fragments that made the floors so hellish, and the woman confirms his understanding. With that, she asks if he also knew another revelation. He then realizes that the game's difficulty and summon rates vary drastically between accounts. Bluntly, the woman reveals that the fact Loki never managed to get a hero above 5 stars wasn't just bad luck. In truth, she continues, Niflheim no longer had heroes of that level. It wasn't simply a matter of luck. Additionally, she says the difficulty was also higher because his was one of the rare accounts internally rated as rank S. Thus, she concludes that his situation was the most disadvantageous of all possibilities. She finishes by saying that it's still a mystery how he managed to reach the 88th floor. Suddenly, a digital platform materializes in front of them with an intense light. At that moment, he recalls that these were the most powerful heroes of Niflheim. All from rank 5 to 1 were gathered there to face the imminent threat. Meanwhile, a gigantic creature watched them through a rift. Soon, multiple tentacles rush forward at high speed. Then, a heroine in a white cape confronts the serpentine creatures. With that, the effects of the tactics room activate, installing the map and strategy screen. The one comments that these were the new tactics created by him, with a complex plan but a direct objective. She then instructs him to pay attention to how the heroes operate. As everyone gathers around a tactical globe, she asks what kind of existence he represents to them. Then she reveals that this is why, as Master Loki, he is considered unique. One of the heroes asks what the command is, to which another replies that the plan is perfect and needs no adjustments. The group's leader declares that failure will not be tolerated, something understood by everyone on the team, including him. Soon, a notification states that the time freeze will end in 10 seconds, and a figure says they will act as they swore. Nahak of Geisfeld introduces herself as the King's Bow, surrounded by lightning. Next, Mutant Nedelk announces himself as the Spear of the King, while the mission countdown begins. Thus, Redigen, the Sword of the King, reveals himself as the timer hits 5 seconds. Shortly after, Yrnet Seed introduces herself as the Eye of the King, with the countdown reaching 3. Finally, Cirrus Agentime, the Flame of the King, appears as the timer runs out. As soon as the mission starts, the tentacles charge forward at high speed. Cirrus then unleashes a powerful fire attack against the serpentine creature. The offensive results in an intense explosion that hits the enemies directly. With admiration, the woman asks if the heroes aren't impressive, and Han Ilat confirms that they indeed swore loyalty. He acknowledges that they are the strongest 6 stars, but questions the real value of that, even with her assuring they were well raised. However, he states that their ability isn't what matters most, it's what they think of their master. She explains that when the heroes discover they are treated like toys, they fall into despair and begin to question their loyalty. Still, she points out that he was an exception, the only one who truly reigned in the waiting room. With that, she declares that Loki, or rather Han Islat himself, was the true king of Niflheim. To conclude, she reveals that the heroes of that world are searching for him and know that he went to that place. Next, she questions what kind of hero would cross dimensions just to reunite with a missing master. Right after, she remarks that his gameplay style was unique and elegant, something even she could recognize. Thinking aloud, she asks who would imagine the emergence of a master who didn't even use synthesis. According to her, ordinary masters use that feature to control their heroes through fear, discarding them without remorse. Even low-ranked ones with potential were sacrificed as food for the stronger ones. Han Ilat then recalls that, for never having gotten a 5-star, his account was labeled cursed, but he never considered deleting it. He also remembers that he had grown used to irrationality from a very young age. In his mind, the image of a man walking away from a child in a snow-covered street appears. He clarifies that he only resorted to synthesis when truly necessary, something that, according to her, almost never happened. He explains that, unlike so many other masters who treated their heroes as disposable his style of play was different. Even low-ranking ones were never ignored because he knew that ruling through fear would inevitably lead to collapse. That's why he rewarded his heroes when they proved their worth and punished them when they failed. The woman looks at him, then asks if he already knew the truth. She then reveals that the heroes were, in fact, human. She admits she doesn't know how he discovered it, but says it would have been impossible to play that way without knowing the truth. With a gleam in her eyes, she declares that this is the conclusion she came to. Even so, Han Islet reflects that the heroes were so realistic in their reactions that it was hard to believe they were just a program. Even so, he never thought they were human, considering his approach merely an efficient strategy. That's why he asks if his style pleased her, and the woman confirms it, lamenting not being able to speak with him on Earth. Right after, she adds that he could have put her in a coffin if they had met in that world. As she approaches, she says her resentment is deep and that she can be sure he'll never forget. Faced with that, the woman asks if he really got that angry. At that moment, Han Islet appears behind her and declares that he's from Earth, telling her not to force her situation onto others. She replies that the heroes of Niflheim would be devastated, but the young man says they can be as devastated as they want. However, the woman thinks that if all she wanted was for him to climb the tower, she wouldn't have brought him there since his group was already ascending with determination. While reflecting that the 90th floor was approaching, the warrior says he will not cooperate. He says he was dragged there when he was almost with his companions and tells her to disappear before he loses his patience. The woman replies that all she wants is for him to reach the top safely, and because of that, she can forgive his insult. Then he asks if she was the one who made the dark priest appear on the 10th floor, and she returns the question. Soon after, she advises him not to get so angry and promises not to interfere anymore after floor 15. Even so, she warns that Tanir will still greet him with a shock, even without her interference. She also reveals that the place is also rank S difficulty, just like Niflheim. She states that although the chance of a master giving up is 90%, that can change with a little help. Finally, she swears in her name that if he climbs all the way to the top, she'll return him to where he came from. Additionally, she promises to transfer all the shares she owns in Mobius to him. With that, he would become one of the major shareholders of a megacorporation that affects the global economy. At that moment, Han Islet considers the offer and accepts the contract on the condition that she never appears in front of him again. Even so, he thinks he can't trust her and still hates her, without understanding why. Suddenly, the woman's head is struck by a dagger thrown by him. He gives his answer, declaring that he will return with his own strength, without depending on her. The woman composes herself and says she'll forgive the disrespect, as he wouldn't have been able to climb without that spirit. Right after, she announces that she'll show him something when the climb begins, as a large door materializes. The door opens, revealing a light and the announcement of the true prologue of Pick Me Up. Then, intense energy emanates from the portal with the message that it was prepared just for him. The final scene shows a land where humans and demi-humans live peacefully together. The setting opens in Tanir, a land of harvest and fieldwork. In that continent, peace and prosperity flowed among the people, until an unknown enemy began its invasion, consuming everything in flames. As a result, the continent was destroyed by the power of darkness, and a voice questions the high difficulty of the game. The voice explains that it's because Loki must reverse a fate that ended in failure. However, hope still exists in him, and to save the world, he must climb the tower. Many heroes will be on his journey, and he must trust in his bond, for the future is in his hands. Soon after, the voices of the heroes echo, reinforcing that the future of the world is in his and his master's hands. Despite the warnings about the enemies that will block his path, the young man simply considers the situation trash. Before the portal, a voice encourages him to climb, correcting it to "we, not just I, will be waiting." Even with the promise that they'll be waiting, he simply ignores the plea. With that, a notification announces that the hero's memories have been awakened and his advancement to 2 stars is complete. He then wonders if this is the end, as the system informs him that his level and skill caps have increased. Shortly after, he approaches Aaron, who greets him, saying the boss is back. The companion asks what he did alone, and the other replies that it was his advancement, stating that the ally will have one soon too. Aaron replies that nothing much happened, just the usual. At that moment, the warrior thinks that the younger sister is the reason his friend needs to come back, while his own goal of climbing the tower hasn't changed. He reflects on returning to Earth and states that, if anything has changed, it's that his feeling of aversion has grown stronger. With a fixed gaze, he promises that he will repay the debt, no matter who the person is or what their name may be. On the second day, an official announcement apologizes to all masters for the unplanned disconnection that occurred days before. The notice explains that all lower-level masters were affected by the disconnection, which was covered in a published article. Suddenly, the fairy appears celebrating and congratulates Loki on his advancement. Heisel asks about his reaction, and he reveals that he met her original body. Confused, the fairy asks what he means by original body, and the young man asks if she is the co-CEO of Mobius. The tiny creature denies it and asks how much he heard, but he says he doesn't care because nothing will change. He then declares that he will climb the tower and that he only needs her help for that, to which she agrees. Next, the fairy shows him a golden gift ticket and tells him to take whatever he wants. He asks if the gift is for him, and the creature confirms it's from the master, making him think that even the master knows how amazing Loki is. Soon after, an explanation about the gift system appears, and the hero concludes that the value of the ticket reflects how much the master values him. Despite that, he rejects the gift, saying he doesn't need it, and the system confirms the action. The fairy insists that he can take whatever he wants with the ticket, but he corrects her, saying he can't take everything. Soon after, he turns to head to bed, and the fairy follows him, asking him to wait. With that, the little creature uses the gift ticket and buys a warhorse statue. The gift is delivered and the young man questions what it is, while the system informs him that it was an item intended for him. He then throws the statue away, stating that the other heroes would be sad if only one of them received a gift. He reflects that although giving gifts is normal, it's necessary to consider each hero's personality. Lying down, he concludes that using a gift the wrong way is worse than not using it at all, since he knows his team's personalities well. Standing before a door with the group gathered, he states that the biggest problem is the enemy, and they need to put an end to it quickly. However, he also acknowledges that the true problem is the enemy called Master, a beginner who needs to wake up. While Ivolka asks where they're going, the strategist thinks her stress level is at its peak, making further climbing impossible. Right after, the main dungeon screen appears, indicating that the master still hasn't realized the true nature of the game. Seeing the notification, the young man comments on the arrogance of the one guiding them. A notification then announces the attempt of floor 11 in the main dungeon, stating that the portal will open in 10 seconds. He confirms it's floor 11 and tells the team to get ready, while the archer questions if they're advancing already. At that moment, he reflects on the disease of masters who, even after leaving strategy to the heroes, believe they cleared the floor by their own merit. He then thinks that sending the team straight to floor 11 without reorganizing shows the player is clearly under a misunderstanding. That misunderstanding, he concludes, is the belief that they're a good master, making him question whether they'll ever reach floor 100 with someone like that. Then skeletons begin to rise from their graves in a dark cemetery. Next, a horde of 14 level 11 creatures reveals itself before them. Faced with the situation, Han Ilat decides to deal with the enemies first and orders everyone to take their combat positions. As he advances, he reflects that the game was considered bad because the early difficulty depended on luck. With that, he remembers that the experience varied drastically depending on the heroes obtained from crushing a skeleton. Wondering about Wadver's case, a combustion skill incinerates the enemies. The young man recalls that Wadver's first hero was synthesized into him, but that didn't mean his luck was bad. He thinks about how the other player progressed using the same strategy he did, while Jinna complains about the skeletons during combat. After the 5th floor, he notices that Wadver began to deviate from the pattern after clearing a group mission solo. Soon, he made other mistakes like risky summons and advancing through floors too early, confusing his own skill level. Finally, the strategist concludes that impatient masters are arrogant, while the group watches the defeated enemies. At that moment, he realizes it's been a while since he last leveled up. The scene shifts to the outside of a residence at night. Inside the room, he calls for Izel, and the fairy promptly appears in response. He comments on how fast she was, and then the creature asks the reason for the call. The young man says he wants to know something and cuts her off, saying he already knows the information limitations. Next, he asks if she can share peripheral details, and Izel replies that normally she can't. Even so, the fairy decides to make an exception and agrees to answer his questions. Then he asks for the original name of the girl's body, which momentarily confuses her. Soon, the small figure explains that the director has many names, and in Tanir, she is called by a specific one. Izel reveals the name Tail, which the young man repeats softly. With that, he deduces that her name in Niflheim must also be different, since it changes with each world. He then remembers that the waiting room's name changed depending on the master, like Niflheim, Raglansid, and Ezekiel. Continuing, he asks his next question, wanting to know what Mobius is. The fairy asks if he's referring to their company, but he denies it. She then shows she understood what he meant. Next, Izel reveals that Mobius is a spiral universe connected in parallel with many other worlds. The young man concludes that this is why each master is assigned to a different world, with unique missions and heroes. From there, he believes he's beginning to understand that girl's identity bit by bit. Finally, he asks if Wadver is human, and Izel confirms it, stating that only humans from Earth can become masters. He clarifies that his question was whether Tail had ever done anything directly with Wadver. With that, Aizel repeats the question, wondering about the idea of doing something with a master. The small creature then asks for a moment to check the information, while he waits in his bed. As he waits, he decides to put aside thoughts about Mobius for now. Aizel returns and assures him that whatever is a regular user, saying she confirmed the information with another director. Additionally, the fairy adds that interference of that kind would require very strict conditions and high risks, and he simply responds that he understands. With that, the young man concludes that Whatever was a regular master with no interference, while Ursher moves forward to fight. Soon he realizes that Whatever's progression was just like that of a normal game, while he continues battling. Next, he concludes that he wasn't wrong in his judgment as he blocks an enemy strike. He then thinks the player has really become arrogant, just as Roderick attacks with his weapon. While defending himself from multiple attacks, he reflects that the other will have trouble in the future if the symptoms get worse. Shortly after, Ursher attacks, and he defends with his shield. Then Edith and the same warrior team up against him at the same time. As he dodges, he complains that a 3-on-1 fight is too much. While Aaron and Jenna advance, he believes that with the right measures, the situation can be reversed. With that, the entire group fights together against everyone. He then thinks that the most effective way to cure this arrogance is to eliminate the hero the master relies on the most. Soon, he realizes that he is that hero. Then, Aizel calls the allies and announces that they will go to the 12th floor, causing some to question the fast pace. As the fairy opens the space-time rift, everyone realizes that the master intends to go through 2 floors in less than a day. Seeing the leader standing still, Gina asks if the boss isn't going with them. Ignoring the portal, he asks Aizel which floor was assigned to them by Whatever. The creature confirms that the destination is the 12th floor. He thinks it was just as he expected. Soon after, he reflects that heroes can make demands and push back against their master's orders. With that, he declares that he refuses to participate, and a system notification confirms his refusal. Aizel questions the decision, which he confirms seriously. While Evolka and Gina argue about the situation, the young man tells them that they too can refuse to follow the order. Next, he admits that he'll have to face the consequences, explaining to Jenna that other heroes were dragged along because they didn't know the proper way to refuse. The fairy asks him to reconsider since it's dangerous, but he counters by asking whether the master's actions aren't dangerous as well. Despite her insistence, he says he understands her point. He then reflects that although he can refuse the mission, he can't go against synthesis and could be turned into material for another character if Whatever gets angry. Even aware of the risk, he reinforces his decision not to participate. With that, Evolka asks what will happen to the rest of the group and whether they'll have to fight without him. The warrior replies that he won't stop them and that they must decide for themselves. As Evolka steps away from the portal, Aaron declares that he won't go either, and his refusal to participate is confirmed by the system. Next, Jenna complains that he should have told them about this option earlier and also refuses to participate, which is confirmed by the system. Seeing that she'd be alone, Evolka also refuses to participate, and the system registers her decision. Soon after, a system tip suggests punishing the leader of the rebellion, and the young man tells Aizel he knows that message wasn't written by her. Finally, Jenna asks the boss what they'll do now, but he remains silent. With a smile, he replies that they'll wait and see. Right after, a giant eye appears in the sky, and he wonders what the master will do now. At that moment, Han Eilat reflects that the master didn't expect the rebellion, saying he would have known if he had been observing their battles. Next, the fairy Aizel appears in the air and summons Edith, Roderick, Ursher, and Daika. Soon, the summoned group approaches, and Edith asks why they were called, while also questioning why the others aren't going. The strategist informs the warrior that his group decided not to go, which leaves her speechless for a moment. Edith then warns him about the danger, stating that he'll die if he doesn't prove his worth to the master. With that, he asks if she would really die just because of an order, even knowing the master won't be pleased with her refusal. Faced with her silence, he reminds her that she was also fighting to survive. The young man concludes in his thoughts that no hero in that room holds that kind of loyalty. Edith then says that her group will go because they need the experience and don't want to be synthesized, confirming the idea that everyone is fighting to avoid death. With the decision made, the group positions itself before a large portal of energy. Jin asks what will happen to them now, but the leader simply answers with uncertainty. After she points out that it's unusual for him to give such a response, the young man instructs her that if he's synthesized and dies, they must all obey the master. Gina and Aaron, however, say there's no way he'll die, and even Evolka acknowledges the boldness of his decision. He smiles discreetly, thinking to himself that those brats have grown up a lot. As he observes the notification showing Dekka and Ursher bleeding, he comments that floor 12 was much harder. Right after, Edith's group returns through the portal, all visibly wounded and exhausted. The warrior then approaches and asks how the experience was, but he remains silent. Without receiving an answer, she simply calls out Han's name. With new conviction, Edith asks him to teach her how to refuse an order. The young man looks at her with a slight smile and replies that it's easy. A system notification appears, informing that Edith refused to participate and that Team 2 is out of control. Isol reacts, realizing that the situation has worsened, since with teams out of control, the waiting room is frozen. Aaron then comments that even without commands, the master will continue his activities and the training won't stop. With that, Han Islet suggests using the dungeons to stock up on potions and train, but Isol worries about the risk of getting the account deleted. He says the master could do that, but such an action would prove he isn't capable of climbing the tower. The fairy then asks what would happen if he were synthesized, to which the young man replies he'd rather die painlessly than suffer for no reason. He then argues that, to resolve the rebellion, it would be enough to synthesize the heroes who started it. Holding Isol, the young man explains that although it would destroy morale, it would prevent further disobedience. As the group walks away, the fairy agrees but concludes that the master wouldn't know how to think of such strategies. The next day, Han Islet narrates that they went to the daily dungeons to collect attribute stones. Next, he joined Volka and Jinna teamed up with Aaron, obtaining low-rank fire stones. After the rotations ended, the training continued until their abilities no longer improved with basic methods. With that, Han Islet instructed Volka to train telekinesis, but she protested that she only used fire magic, so he threatened her about her food. Soon after, he realized that the master hadn't logged into the game that day, nor the next. Isol then asked him if the master had really stopped playing, but he only replied that he didn't know. Suddenly, a welcome notification appeared on the screen, and the fairies celebrated the master's return. Edith asked if he might have changed his mind, but Han Islet promptly denied the possibility. While drinking, he reflected that arrogance wouldn't be so infamous if it could be cured easily. Placing his cup on the table, he thought the master's intention was obvious. The system announced the start of premium summons, and the master obtained the rare hero Stain. Right after, he also managed to summon the rare units Majel and Tasher. Seeing the new additions, Edith commented on the new recruits, and Han Islet stood up and confirmed. When the warrior suggested a selection order for the newcomers, he cut her off, stating that they wouldn't be joining any teams. Han Islet simply told her to watch, while the three new recruits were already arguing in the distance. Tasher brandished his weapon and shouted, while a system notification indicated his hostility toward Majel. Then the mage asked if she was being disrespected for being a woman, with the system also displaying her hostility. As the system announced the hostility status, Han Islet observed that they had already arrived like that. Then Stain approached and asked if he had arrived earlier, receiving a confirmation. The young man introduced himself and asked for help calming the others, but Tasher scoffed at him for being just a novice. Majel then agreed with the provocation and told Stain to go call his mom, which triggered an immediate reaction. With that, the young man shouted that he wouldn't forgive insults to his mother, and the system registered his hostility toward the two. Edith asked what was going on, and Han Islet commented that their personalities didn't match. He then reflected on compatibility and penalties between heroes, finding it rare to see such instant hostility. Tasher charged at Stain with his weapon in hand, shouting that he'd teach him a lesson. Immediately, the apprentice blocked the attack with his sword, manifesting a defensive barrier. Suddenly, Isol appeared in the air and asked if they wanted to die, interrupting the fight. As soon as she introduced herself as the master's assistant, she warned them not to annoy her, claiming she was stronger than all of them. Upon hearing the word master, Stain put his hand to his head and repeated the term. Isol forbade any more fighting in the waiting room, while Majel asked to keep the other two away from her. Then the mage turned to the protagonist and suggested that if he needed to form a team, he should pair her with him. Isol, however, denies the request and states that the team's decision belongs to the master. With that, the system creates Team 3, with Steen, Majel, and Tasher, opening a space-time rift. Soon after, Han's companion asks where he's going and what about the others, receiving sleep as his answer. Han then states that they won't be coming back. Already in his room, he sits on the bed while notifications inform that Tasher has entered a rage, triggering friendly fire. Lying down, he sees new messages about Stain bleeding and also entering a rage. As he closes his eyes, more notifications indicate that Majel has entered a rage, resulting in more friendly fire. An alert informs that Stain has killed an ally, and Han just mumbles that he's trying to sleep. Finally, a sequence of alerts announces the death of the entire group, making Han complain about the notifications. Suddenly, the fairy Isol appears floating over the boy, who is lying on the bed. Just as his system window asks if the master wants to give up, she says goodbye and begins to fall. In a panic, she asks what they'll do if the account is deleted and what will happen to them. Isol warns that the account will be deleted after 6 months of master inactivity, which for them equals a year and a half. She then shouts that the waiting room can't be maintained without the master and will disappear forever. But the young man grabs her and tells her not to panic just yet. He then explains that if he were going to quit playing, he would have given up a long time ago, which makes the fairy question him. Finally, Isel agrees to trust him, and he asks why she's panicking, questioning if she'll die if they don't climb the tower. After her affirmative answer, he stares at her in silence. Sitting on the bed, he directly asks if she's going to die. However, Isel clarifies that she will, in fact, disappear. Still, the player remains silent, looking at the fairy. Soon after, he reflects on the short 6-month deadline they have. Thus, looking out the window, he concludes that there's not much time left to reach Niflheim. The next day, a system message appears about the city, instructing the master to buy whatever he wants. While staring down another player in the plaza, the system announces the start of premium summons. Soon, a large portal opens with an intense glow. Next, the rare hero Noken is summoned and complains that there are no women around. After him, the rare hero Winard appears, commenting that the place seems nice, but that he'd rather eat something first. Additionally, the third summon brings the rare hero Gelen, who demands to know who the leader is to guide them. With that, Aaron suggests getting the newcomers a lesson, but the master declines the offer. Even so, Noken approaches to threaten him, but the boy just says he'll hear him out on the training field. He then asks Edith to take the new heroes and instructs her to be gentler than she was with their own group. Ignoring the words, Noken charges in and attacks with his sword. However, the other averts his gaze and says he wasn't referring to them, but to the boss. In one swift move, he punches him in the face, sending the hero flying backward with the impact. It is soon revealed that the master made 3 new summons and will use weak units to complete the team. Moreover, the analysis continues, explaining that although there is a strategy for it, doing 5 summons would be ideal, while he holds Noken. He then welcomes the warrior and announces he will train him immediately for a real battle. Soon after, he opens a rift in space-time. Finally, it is narrated that, despite poor synergy and one severe injury, the 3 pass the test without any death. As Isel delivers a reward for the good work, he thinks that everyone understood their roles well. Walking beside the young man, Gina asks if something isn't dangerous, and he asks what she's referring to. The archer points to Noken's group and expresses concern that the master might replace them with those heroes. At the same moment, the warrior realizes they're being watched. Soon after, he sees the other group approaching. Because of that, the boy asks Jenna to leave them alone as he continues on his way. More time passes, and Team 3 continues to grow stronger through battles without any deaths, showing good teamwork. Noken comments to his group that the master's plan seems to be working, and that they've been abandoned. With that, they plan to consume the other team, recruit the mage to their side, and get rid of one of their own members. Suddenly, the strategist appears behind one of them, commenting that the conversation is interesting. When questioned, he claims he was just getting some water and invites them to continue, making Noken come up with an excuse to go to sleep. As he walks away, he observes that they lack teamwork, but the master seems satisfied with the outcome. It is shown that Team 3, despite some issues, managed to pass the 14th floor of the tower. While running, he reflects that the master keeps forcing the team to climb, and that on the 15th floor his own group will be synthesized. Soon, Volkov approaches and suggests they need to act, as the other team will catch up to them soon. But he replies that he's already doing something and says he won't stop her if she wants to switch teams. Although she hears that, she refuses the idea, and he then asks her to just wait until the right opportunity comes. He then asks if her telekinesis is good enough, and Volkov responds confidently. Soon after, she focuses and uses her power to silently levitate a pair of boots from the ground. With that, he praises her progress, noting that the mage already masters silent and moving spellcasting. It is noted, however, that the master made no progress in developing the base. Although the waiting room is well equipped, the number of people is saturated and no new facility has been built. Because of that, the master's full attention is focused on Team 3 and their advancement in the tower. Meanwhile, preparations for the completion of the 15th floor were being made smoothly. Sensing the master's attention, the team members began to show their true intentions and act aggressively. Suddenly, a voice summons Team 3 to gather in the city square. Once gathered, the members get ready to act, with Noken saying it's now or never. While Gina complains that the master gave their items to the other team, he replies they can simply get more. At the same time, a member of Team 3 notices the crowd gathered to watch, thinking it's better that way. Soon after, a space-time rift opens in the middle of the square. With that, Noken enters the portal and shouts that he'll speak with the master to punish the boy upon return. Then Edith comments on his popularity, while Aaron questions what will happen if the other team succeeds. For that reason, he warns they must stop rebelling or they'll die, as the chance of Team 3 succeeding is not zero. It is explained that if they return, the master will no longer need the current group, and so they must not rebel. Then the strategist declares he will be synthesized while Noken orders his team, protected by a barrier, to go kill everyone. Soon after, it is revealed that either they will be synthesized once Team 3 completes the floor, or the other team will fail. Finally, he understands that all of this is a bet happening right at that moment. Since there are no death notifications, the strategist thinks the group must be doing well. Suddenly, his face shows a sign of doubt. Then a system message informs that Group 3 was eliminated and the mission failed. So he reflects that it all happened in less than 5 minutes in a special mission. They are then hit by an energy surge, and Gina becomes concerned about what's happening. With the failure, a system window appears and Isol reacts upon seeing her master disconnect the link. Isol panics, asking what they will do, but he tells her to calm down since people are watching. He then tells the girl that the show is over, and when asked about Group 3, confirms they were annihilated. He explains they died at the start for attacking without a plan and concludes that was their limit. After this event, a message narrates that the master stayed disconnected for a long time. Isol anxiously asks what to do, but the boy simply replies that he is training and tells her to rest. With that, she complains that 10 days have passed and, except for him, the other players are starting to slack off in training. Additionally, she explains that without a master, the others have nothing to fear and even avoid daily dungeons. He then reflects that 10 days in the waiting room means the master hasn't logged in for 3 days in real-world time. Suddenly, a voice announces the master's return, and Isol approaches to greet him. Right after that, a system notification informs that a screenshot was taken and saved to the phone's gallery. Isol then wonders why he hasn't done anything even after being absent for so long. As she assumes he might uninstall the game, he corrects her, saying he actually took a screenshot. He then wonders why someone would take a screenshot, maybe just to keep it as a memento. He then asks the fairy what her hobby is, and she replies that it's surfing the internet. Upon hearing that, he concludes that she has internet access and says it out loud. Isol crosses her arms and asks him what's going on. He then says that he'll need her help with something. In response, she questions if he's thinking of using the internet in that place. The young man lies down on the bed and says it's fine if she can't do it, but Isol immediately claims she can. When he asks what the problem is, she explains that interfering with another dimension isn't easy, and on top of that, it comes with a penalty. Isol then details that she needs to gather the power left behind by the master, and that the usable time is reduced if she tries to interact with the internet. He agrees that this doesn't sound like a hobby, while she laments not being able to check in on her Ragnarok fan club for a long time. Then the strategist sits up and reaffirms that he needs to use the internet, lamenting he can't do it himself when she asks. Isol just makes a face at the request. Even so, she slaps her cheeks and agrees to help him. Soon, Isol transforms into a new outfit and says she'll do anything for Loki. With a shout of fairy power, she summons a virtual keyboard and screen. As she warns she won't last long, the young man asks about the pose, and she says it helps her concentrate. Isol tells him to hurry up, but he tells her to stay quiet, promising it'll be over quickly. He then accesses the Pick Me Up community page and thinks it's been a long time since he last visited. He browses the page and clicks on the career counseling board. Soon he finds a post by the master, whatever, asking for help because he's stuck in the game and feels things are weird. Then he sees illustrations of the characters, including his own, and realizes he has become a video game character. He quickly notices that all the comments on the post are just mocking or criticizing the master. Seeing Isol almost at her limit, he realizes he can't take too long, so he begins typing quickly, planning to interfere by sending the files he had saved to whatever. He then sends an email, convinced that this will teach the master to act differently. However, the forum users react to his public message, and he tells the fairy that he should have sent it privately. Once he finishes, he praises Isol for the good work, and when she asks if it worked, he replies that now it's all in whatever's hands. The assistant, exhausted, asks what files he sent, and the strategist says they were his game records and other stuff. Suddenly, she perks up and asks if he sent the Book of Celestial Arts, which leaves him confused. Isol goes on about the legendary complete edition of the book, but he tells her to stop saying nonsense. He quickly clarifies that he sent his records and 2 years' worth of gameplay analysis, and the fairy realizes the legend was true. Finally, he thinks that even if he isn't sure everything about the game is in there, he sent everything he knows. Then he reflects that there's no way to guarantee whatever will read it all, since the writing was never meant for others. But he believes that if the master reads it all and then creates his own version of the strategies. With a slight smile on his face, he concludes that things are about to get fun. He then wonders whether the master will lose interest in the game or try one more time. Soon, a message pops up, loading complete, followed by another saying, "Welcome back to Pick Me Up." Then he comments that the master has finally returned. Isol appears right behind him and calls his name Loki. Suddenly, a warhorse statue appears as a gift from the master, as indicated by the system notification. He extends his hand and claims the item, while Isol asks if he's going to break it again. As he holds the statue, he explains that he made a few edits to the files before sending them to whatever. He then reveals that he wrote a note asking the master to send the statue to his favorite hero, and a notification confirms that their relationship has improved. As he walks, he concludes that the master really did read all the pages to the end. Then he reflects that he doesn't need a mediocre master, because to climb the tower, they'll have to be the best among 100 million players. At last he thinks that he only works with the best and that, even if the master didn't understand everything, maybe he has the willpower. With the group gathered, he declares that he'll make his master become the best. He then asks when he'll be able to use the internet, and Isel explains it depends on the residual power absorbed from the master. As he puts on his boots, he asks what the power of interference is. Isel then explains that it is an energy capable of adjusting the laws of the world, accumulating faster on higher floors. Right after, she reveals that the crystallization of this power results in gems with the power of creation. The boy asks if money also has this power, and Isel confirms the value of human currency, mentioning an additional bonus. Shortly after, he informs the group that they will finally leave after a long rest. With that, he joins them and declares that the rebellion is over, as the team is once again under his command. While walking, Jenna comments that she doesn't care about the master's actions, and he asks if the others are excited to leave. Sarcastically, Yvolka then confirms she's also eager to depart. Aaron turns to the leader and asks if they don't need another member, but he says not to worry about it. At that moment, Isel informs Edith that the master ordered her to temporarily join Team 1. Upon meeting them, Edith asks if the rebellion is over, and he confirms it, replying they'll soon learn about the master. Edith agrees under that condition, and a notification confirms she has joined Team 1. Then, the strategist opens a space-time rift and explains that she'll return to Team 2 after the 15th floor. Upon arriving at the main dungeon, a message informs that the portal to the 8th floor will open in 10 seconds. As soon as they reach the 8th floor, he declares it's time to show the results of their training. A horde of level 9 goblin knights charges in for the attack. Yvolka then prepares and uses the skill Turn the Tables. With that, the enemy goblins are converted into her allies. The now controlled monsters turn and attack their former companions. Soon, the allied goblins begin to dominate the other creatures. Meanwhile, Jenna fires arrows with her bow. Her arrows hit every target, finishing them off. Then, Yvolka uses the skill Ignite. A large fire explosion hits the monsters directly. The commander notices that the mage's casting time has drastically decreased as he prepares for the final horde of enemies. With that, he charges in and cuts down several goblins with his strikes. Amid the defeated enemies, Edith asks why she was brought there. He then reflects that Gina's speed has improved enough for him to trust her with the rear guard. Gina asks Edith if she got bored, while the leader believes that, despite everything, she will soon adapt to the team. After the battle, Yvolka is named MVP and says she's tired, prompting the strategist to notice how different she is from before. He informs them that they're not done yet, and even as Yvolka complains, he states she won't have to use her body. A system notification then informs that the master possesses a hero capable of conducting research. Soon, the system suggests starting a research project, and he identifies the place they were taken to as the Magic Hall. Yvolka once again asks why she's there, and the boy reaffirms that she won't have to use her body. Then she asks what he intends to research, and a system panel displays the available research options. Shortly after, the system recommends assigning Yvolka to the laboratory, and Isel's sudden appearance makes her scream. Still startled, the girl asks Isel not to show up out of nowhere, but the other replies that she should get used to it, as she doesn't like it either. Next, Isel points to a table and instructs her to solve the questions and place the answers in the container beside it. Though she recognizes the formulas from the magic school, the young woman hesitates, but Isel pressures her, saying it's an order from the master. Meanwhile, the swordsman flips through a book in the library and realizes he can't read its content. At the nearby table, the mage focuses on solving the magical formulas with a carefully held quill. At that moment, a notification informs that one research point has been obtained at a speed of 10 points per hour at the cost of 10 gems. Faced with that, the observer concludes that her efficiency is low due to not having the appropriate research skill. Soon after, Isel informs that the task will take 3 hours per day, and the scholar refuses, saying it hurts her head. While a message records her displeasure, the girl complains that the questions are hard and that she's being treated like a slave. Thinking about how to keep her satisfied without wasting time, the strategist asks Isel to make a request to the master. In response, a fur coat appears after the system confirms the cost of 3,000 gold coins. Next, he offers the coat as a gift, and the girl hugs him, calling him the scoundrel for trying to convince her like that. When he tells her to give it back, the recipient clutches the coat and confirms she'll do the job as requested. At that moment, the leader reflects on how the master continued organizing the waiting room and gathering members for daily dungeons. Then the thought leads him to remember the creation of weapons in the well-equipped gear workshop. He He also recalls that Team 3 had been reformed with promising summons that were recently made. With all that in mind, the warrior concludes that the master has definitely changed, and that it's not a bad thing. Shortly after, his companion calls him from the other end of the table with a slight smile on her face. She then comments that, aside from fire magic, she's also excellent in theory, and asks if he's ever considered learning magic. At that moment, he questions the suggestion, and she replies that with the books in the room, he could at least learn the basics. Because of that, he reflects that, as a 2-star apprentice, he'll be able to choose a class once he reaches 3 stars, maybe that of a magic swordsman. Even so, he declines the offer, explaining that his evolution would become complicated, and she tells him to let her know if he changes his mind. Right after, the accuser claims that she just doesn't want to work alone, and her reaction confirms his suspicion. After that, she asks about his life before arriving there, and he responds that he was a farmer, which she doesn't believe. However, he remembers hearing that she was the prodigy of a famous noble family that ended up ruined in a political dispute. Suddenly, an energy manifests in the center of the room, and both turn toward the strange phenomenon. With glowing eyes, he simply states with conviction that it has begun. Although a notification informs that the research on hero reaction time has reached level 1, causing the lab to shine. Soon after, a blessing from the goddess falls upon the waiting room in the form of light particles. Meanwhile, the young woman watches one of the lights floating toward her hand. The swordsman, for his part, reflects that the master used 30 points to unlock one of the 3 available research trees. Because of this, she feels dizzy and asks what's going on. Immediately, her companion tells her to say status window, and she asks what a status window is. At that moment, a panel with runes appears in front of the girl, making her scream. He then approaches and explains that it shows her abilities in numerical form. The warrior recalls that Team 3 was wiped out because they couldn't see the system and didn't know what to do to clear the floor. As the young woman reads her abilities aloud, he thinks that the research made it possible. Confirming that those are her abilities, the young man calls her to come with him, saying the others will like the news. As they leave the room, both hear a scream outside about a ghost. They quickly see the young man running from one of the lights, begging for help to make it stop following him. He grabs him and tells him to relax, while the panicked boy asks what that thing is. The particle of light then floats directly into his chest. After the light enters his body, he's left with an expression of bliss amidst floating flowers. Then the archer approaches with her status window and reveals she found out about it by hearing him talk about it. Gathered together, the group discusses the system, and the girl realizes she had already felt its effects without understanding them. She then asks the ally how he discovered it, and he replies that it was by chance. Even with her doubt, the other companion comments that the swordsman has always been with them from the beginning. He credits his knowledge to his time playing, which only makes the girl even more suspicious. Choosing not to insist on the subject, she's backed by the archer, who says his advice is always useful. When called a suck-up by her friend, the other defends herself, saying it's her survival strategy. The warrior then promises to tell them the whole truth if they manage to survive until the end. He thinks to himself that, if that happens, it'll be when they're saying their goodbyes. The next day, the archer shares the research results with everyone in the waiting room. Because of the low research level, only a few, like Edith and Roderick, can see their status windows. Meanwhile, the swordsman trains by breaking several arrows with his sword. She approaches and asks if his defense is also a skill, since he managed to block everything. After he confirms it, the archer complains that she has no chance of winning, and her companion suggests the existence of piercing skills. Curious, the girl then asks him what those piercing skills would be. Suddenly, he attacks her and knocks her to the ground, making her scream and ask if he's trying to kill her. Because of that, he explains they need to increase the intensity of the training, since in the waiting room it's always possible to recover. As he prepares for the next strike, the archer yells for him to choose how to proceed. Then, the swordsman jumps to attack her from above, but she braces for the impact. Now standing, the challenger proposes continuing the fight without rules, so they can choose their weapons and go on. He equips his shield and states that her new training will be dueling. Next, the fighter draws his sword and adds that the duel will go until one of them is dead. While watching, 2 men comment on how amazing the warrior is and doubt the story that he used to be a farmer. Still paying attention, they keep watching the intense fight and conclude that he must have lied about his past. During the battle, the young woman is pushed back by the shield and asks what he's doing. The opponent asks if she's going to surrender, since another teammate is next, while considering fighting both of them at once. Despite that, the mage refuses the duel after his 32 defeats, but the archer, with 18, decides to keep trying. With determination, she composes herself and gets ready once again for combat. He then accepts the challenge and charges into attack. Suddenly, a dagger grazes his face. By reflex, he manages to dodge the projectile at the last second and identifies the weapon as a dagger. Immediately, a system notification informs that his teammate has gained the skill find weaknesses. Right after, he is hit by multiple attacks and questions what they are. After the assault, he approaches the archer and asks where she learned that technique. She replies that she just thought about piercing his defenses, inspired by something he himself had said. Reflecting that he was just speaking casually, the swordsman, now finding the situation amusing, invites her for another round. The archer then prepares a special arrow and warns him that it won't be easy. Noticing the strategy, he realizes that she forces him to dodge the first arrow so she can aim at his vital points with the second, switching the order to trick him. He concludes that by mixing real and fake attacks, facing Jin has become much harder. Next, a notification informs that her archery has increased to level 6. With her newly enhanced skill, she fires another volley of arrows at her opponent. The warrior is hit by some projectiles as he tries to defend with his shield. Facing the attack, he begins to question whether he will lose the fight. Meanwhile, the spectators comment that despite the warrior's strength, the archer clearly isn't playing around either. The mage hears the background comments while a drop of sweat rolls down his face. From a distance, he also observes the scene and reflects on what true talent is. With her eyes focused, the archer fires another one of her special arrows. While defending himself from the attacks, the swordsman reflects that it's not easy to get close to her. Because of that, he decides to use his shield only in emergencies, while considering that the training is meant to unlock a new skill. An arrow grazes his head, and he concludes he needs to go beyond simply tracking its path. Soon, multiple arrows, including a special one, fly toward him. Then, the warrior focuses to understand the intention imbued in each arrow. The tip of one of them stops centimeters from his eye. With a quick movement, he dodges the projectiles and manages to get close to his opponent. Placing the sword at her neck, he asks if that's her 19th defeat, and the young woman calls him a monster. After the fight, the combatant asks his teammate how many skills he has, and the answer is 3. Then he questions the archer, who starts listing her many archery and proficiency skills. Reacting to the friend's surprise, the swordsman explains that the level of the skills is more important than the quantity. While pondering, he reflects that opposite skills can lead to conflict, citing his own rage and composure as an exception. Even so, he notes that his companion has a total of 9 skills, considering her a true gem. The boy watches her closely as she wipes her face. Soon after, an attempt to synthesize ingredients with fairy power is initiated in a magic circle. However, a notification states that the synthesis failed and the ingredients were wasted. Sitting on a bench, he wonders how the synthesis failed, while the archer asks if she'll also get an advancement. She updates the group's levels and, holding an item, says she'll be right back, asking if she's going to die in the process. At that moment, the warrior reflects that his own advancement was a special case due to Tails' intervention. He assumes that, upon entering the fountain portal, his companion will likely see something different inside. A system notification then confirms that her memories have been awakened and that she has completed her advancement to 2 stars. Shortly after, the young woman approaches the swordsman, who watches her in silence. She then says she had a strange dream about the forest she used to live in being on fire. He reassures her that it was just a dream, but she still wears a doubtful expression. The archer tries to convince herself that it was just a nightmare. When he asks if there's anything else, she tells him she just felt something open, but nothing more than that. The fighter reflects that a common advancement only reveals a dream, considering the possibility of regaining memories through them. With that, he concludes that the heroes present must suffer from some level of amnesia. He also supposes that, upon reaching 4 or 5 stars, they will finally understand the truth about how they were summoned. That truth, he thinks, also extends to what really happened to their worlds of origin. Soon after, the other companion completes his awakening too, and the warrior notices that he seems even more motivated than before. The young man asks if he's not coming back, but the swordsman replies that he needs to do something first. He advises him to train more moderately so he doesn't ruin his body, but gets a simple "I'm fine" in return. Taking a deep breath, exhausted from training, the swordsman stands firm. Suddenly, a system notification announces that he has entered a state of rage. Then he unleashes a flurry of rapid strikes with his sword. From a distance, his companion silently watches the training. Next to the destroyed dummy, the swordsman reflects that, although stronger, he still can't guide his blade where he wants. As he thinks, he considers how it's normal for skills to merge, like how his swordsmanship and shield proficiency formed a new mastery. Soon, Edith finds him training and comments that he's up late, to which he asks what she's doing there. Before heading to floor 12, the healer questions him about the team members' pasts as non-combatants, and he responds with another question, wanting to know what the problem is. She then approaches and stares directly at him. With glowing eyes, the woman asks if he's ever killed someone before. The warrior counters, asking if she's questioning his resolve even after they've reached floor 12. She confirms, specifying that she means his will to survive. With the same intensity in his gaze, he responds that his life was extended by someone else's death, and mentions the people synthesized into him. At that moment, she says that he'll know the answer better than she ever could. Then Edith confesses that she was the one who killed nearly all the maned wolves. He asks if she wants to be condemned and advises her to view anything that appears as a monster that must be killed. However, she argues that the other team members might think differently, but the swordsman replies that in that case, he'll just gather new companions. Even so, he reassures her, saying he knows them all well, and she agrees to that condition. Soon after, Isel opens a space-time rift. When they regroup, the archer asks if they're going to floor 11, but the leader clarifies that the next is floor 12. He instructs her to just do what needs to be done, no matter what happens. Then he adds that even if she already knows, it's always good to repeat. As they enter the portal, a notification announces that the floor 12 subjugation mission is to eliminate all enemies. As soon as they arrive, the young woman looks around and asks where the enemies of the subjugation mission are. Suddenly, a voice shouts for them to stop where they are. With that, 13 level 11 human soldiers approach and order them to lower their weapons and state their identities. The archer looks at them and asks what they are. Soon after, the group stares at the soldiers, and she questions out loud whether they're really human. As she watches the scene unfold, Edith seems a little worried. Despite the tense atmosphere, Han Islet prepares for battle with a serious expression. Meanwhile, the other members of the group seem hesitant and reluctant to fight. Then Aaron yells at him that those enemies are people, not monsters. In response, the warrior questions whether they intend not to fight, and Aaron suggests trying to talk first. Volka agrees, saying they could gather information about the place and move forward without fighting. Thoughtfully, Han Islat reflects on the idea of avoiding unnecessary death. Gina also shows hesitation on her face, prompting him to question her. He then thinks that, unlike NPCs, those soldiers see them as enemies. With that, he orders everyone to draw their weapons. The swordsman draws his blade and declares that facing them, he states that if they don't want to fight, they'll have to stop him. He keeps his determined expression. Volka and Edith watch the scene with apprehension. Gina and Aaron also look at him with tense expressions. He remains firm in his decision. Then he says they can do whatever they want. With that, Aaron thanks him and decides to try talking to them. He introduces himself loudly and says he wants to talk. To his surprise, the soldier replies that they also want to talk, since they were brought there all of a sudden. The soldier then suggests they come closer to make the conversation easier, which surprises the group. Aaron agrees, while they demand that weapons be lowered and warn that their comrades are on alert. He then tries to reassure them, stating they only want to leave without fighting. Obeying, he places his spear on the ground. The group leader scolds him and demands that the soldiers also come closer and lower their weapons. He questions the soldiers' lack of respect, asking why only their group should disarm. After a brief conversation with his men, the soldier agrees to the condition. He says they'll send 3 people and throws their weapons on the ground. The 3 approach unarmed and ask the group to do the same. The warrior throws his sword and shield on the ground and asks if they're ready. The other confirms and says they can talk now as he approaches. At that moment, Aaron hears someone saying they have something to say. As he walks, the soldier states that there's a voice in his head constantly saying things, and that even covering his ears doesn't stop it. He reports that the voice is still speaking even now. Smiling, Han Islet asks what it's saying. At that instant, the knight draws his weapon and says the voice wants them to kill them. His allies do the same and draw their weapons to attack. Grabbing his sword, the leader reflects that he's seen these monsters before when he was a master. As he charges, he adds that the heroes who hesitated to strike them were all killed. Quickly, he finishes the soldier by slashing his neck with the blade. Seeing this, Jenna can't understand what's happening. To finish, another enemy grabs his dagger and throws it toward him. It hits squarely on his head, taking down another soldier. Knowing that things can't be solved through talking, he finishes off the enemy, saying it's the only thing that can be done. Right after, another soldier prepares his crossbow to shoot. Before he can fire, he is struck in the head by a dagger. It finished him off before he could use his weapon. The bodies of the defeated soldiers were on the ground. Among the corpses, Han Islet asks him if he still wants to talk, saying that here, it's kill or be killed. Wielding his spear, Aaron decides they'll fight. The warrior then asks Gina, who replies that to stay alive, they'll need to kill them. With her eyes glowing, she prepares for combat and confirms that she's ready. She then fires multiple arrows that strike one of the enemy soldiers. Volka doesn't fall behind and determined begins channeling her magic. Seeing the scene, Edith concludes that she worried for nothing. The group leader reflects that it doesn't matter whether the enemies are monsters or humans. He thinks that the most important thing isn't strength or time, but the mindset and the will to do whatever it takes to survive. With the group now united, he raises his sword and asks if everyone is ready.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.